Economy. You people should be grateful we even let you on this plane. The words weren't whispered, they were announced, delivered with a smirk, and the certainty of someone who believed their uniform gave them absolute power. Vanessa Phillips, lead flight attendant for Global Airways, stood tall in the aisle of Flight 1207, looking down at Anthony and Dr. Kimberly Reynolds, not as passengers, but as inconveniences. What she didn't know was that in exactly 7 minutes, her entire career would come crashing down, and the airline that had encouraged her behavior would face a reckoning that would send shockwaves through the entire industry. The hum of Los Angeles International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar kind of chaos. It was the sound of 1,000 goodbyes and 1,000 hurried hellos, a symphony of rolling luggage wheels on linoleum and filtered gate announcements. For Anthony and Dr. Kimberly Reynolds, it was supposed to be the white noise that signaled the start of a long overdue escape. They stood near Gate 42B bound for Honolulu. The flight was packed, Global Airways jumbo jet visible through the sprawling glass windows. Kimberly, a pediatric surgeon whose hands were more accustomed to surgical steel than a suitcase handle, leaned her head on her husband's shoulder. She wore a simple, elegant set of charcoal gray cashmere sweats. No logos, no flash, just comfort. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her face free of makeup. She looked to any casual observer like a woman tired and ready for a long flight. Anthony wrapped an arm around her. He was broader, a solid presence in a well-worn, faded black Howard University hoodie and cargo shorts. He was a man who listened more than he spoke, his eyes perpetually observant, missing nothing. To the world, they were just another black couple blending into the anonymity of travel. "I cannot wait to feel sand that isn't attached to a playground," Kimberly murmured, her voice tight with exhaustion from a 72-hour shift she'd just completed. 2 weeks, Kim. Nothing but you, me, and umbrella drinks. No pages, no reports. Anthony replied, squeezing her shoulder. His job, which he vaguely described as compliance for the Department of Transportation, was equally draining, filled with endless reports and an exhausting amount of bureaucratic friction. This vacation was a pressure release valve for them both. What most people didn't know about Anthony Reynolds was that he served as a senior compliance inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration. His keen eye for detail and unwavering commitment to safety regulations had earned him respect in professional circles, though he rarely mentioned his position in casual settings. At 38, he had spent over a decade ensuring airlines followed federal guidelines to the letter, not because he loved rules, but because he understood that regulations existed to protect people. Kimberly Reynolds, 36, had built her reputation as one of the top pediatric surgeons at Los Angeles Children's Hospital. Her steady hands had saved countless young lives, her calm demeanor a constant in the chaos of emergency surgeries. What her colleagues respected most was her ability to see the whole picture, not just the medical condition, but the child behind it, the family surrounding them, the entire support system needed for healing. Together, they were a power couple who carried their influence quietly, without flash or announcement. They were also both intimately familiar with being underestimated based on appearance alone. Standing behind the boarding desk, Tyler Wright monitored the boarding process with barely concealed impatience. At 29, with meticulously styled blonde hair and a permanently judgmental expression, he had mastered the art of making economy passengers feel like they were imposing on him personally. His gate agent uniform was impeccable, his demeanor less so. Near him stood Vanessa Phillips, 42, the lead flight attendant for Flight 1207. Her Global Airways uniform was pressed to military precision, not a wrinkle in sight, her makeup flawless, her blonde hair pulled into a tight, perfect bun. 15 years in the industry had shaped her into exactly what the airline rewarded someone who maintained the hierarchy of air travel with ruthless efficiency. First-class passengers received warmth. Economy passengers received processing. Hovering nearby was Lisa Garcia, 24, a newer flight attendant, shadowing Vanessa. Her eyes were still bright with the novelty of the job, her movements eager to please. She watched Vanessa's every move, absorbing the unspoken lessons about who mattered and who didn't. Further down the jet bridge, James Rodriguez, 55, prepared the cabin with the steady efficiency of a 20-year veteran. Unlike Vanessa, his experience had taught him that kindness costs nothing and often made the job easier. His weathered face carried smile lines around the eyes, his movements economical but never rushed. Now boarding Group 4, a tinny voice announced. Anthony and Kimberly were Group 5. They always booked basic economy for personal travel. Anthony, in his line of work, knew the system well. They had paid extra for adjoining aisle and middle seats in an exit row for Kimberly's long legs and her type 1 diabetes, which sometimes required her to get up suddenly. Finally, Group 5 is now boarding, came the announcement laced with the subtle implication that they were the last, the least, the afterthought of air travel. They joined the last straggle of passengers. Tyler, radiating profound irritation, scanned Kimberly's boarding pass. Beep. A harsh red light flashed. Beep. He scanned Anthony's with the same result. Tyler let out an exaggerated sigh, not even looking at them. "Computer's flagging your seats," he mumbled, typing furiously. "Yeah, looks like we had an aircraft swap. Your pre-selected seats 22B and 22C don't exist on this plane's configuration." Kimberly stiffened. "Oh well, can you please find us 2 seats together?" "We paid for." Tyler cut her off, his eyes still glued to the screen. "You paid for a request. Basic economy fares are subject to reassignment. It's in the terms of service you clicked yes to." Standing next to Tyler, observing the boarding process, Vanessa gave Anthony and Kimberly a slow, dismissive up-and-down look. Her eyes lingered on Anthony's hoodie and her lips pursed in a look of clear distaste. "What do we have left?" "Tyler." "Vanessa," asked her voice, a high-pitched, imperious drawl. "Just 38B and 41E, Tyler said, still typing. "Middle seats separate back by the labs." "We'll be separated," Kimberly asked, a note of real concern entering her voice. "Sir, I have a medical condition. I really need to be seated with my husband." This finally made Tyler look up. He shared a glance with Vanessa. It was a micro-expression, a tiny shared smirk that lasted less than a second, but it was unmistakable. Vanessa stepped forward, taking charge. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with false patience. "Everyone has a condition when their budget ticket doesn't get them what they want. This is a full flight. You can either take the seats assigned or you can be rebooked on the next available flight, which is—" She glanced at Tyler. "Looks like Thursday," Tyler chirped, his customer service smile suddenly bright and malicious. Anthony held up a hand, his voice calm. "We'll take the seats." He could feel the humiliation radiating from his wife. This wasn't about the seats. It was about the way it was done, the assumption, the immediate dismissal. "Thank you for your cooperation," Vanessa said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Please move along. You're holding up the last of the boarding." As they walked down the jet bridge, Anthony's hand on the small of Kimberly's back, they heard Vanessa's voice, now a stage whisper, to Tyler. Unbelievable. Dressed like they're going to the gym, but expecting first-class service. They're lucky to be on the plane at all. Tyler's snicker followed them into the aircraft. Anthony's jaw tightened. He said nothing but his eyes. His eyes were recording. The casual cruelty, the gate agent's name, the purser's ID, which he'd clocked as she leaned in. Vanessa P. 42871. He was an FAA investigator, and his vacation, it seemed, was already over. 7 minutes until revelation. The seats were as bad as advertised. Kimberly was in 38B, a non-reclining middle seat wedged between a broad-shouldered man who immediately fell asleep and a young mother with an infant. Anthony was 3 rows back in 41E. Another middle seat pinned between two teenagers playing a video game on a shared console, their elbows flying. Anthony could see the top of Kimberly's head. She was trying to read a medical journal on her tablet, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. This was a 5.5-hour flight. The cabin doors closed, and Vanessa began her welcome announcement. Her voice was a perfect blend of warmth and authority, a complete fabrication. On behalf of Global Airways and this entire Honolulu-based crew, we'd like to welcome you aboard. Anthony watched her. She moved through the cabin with a proprietary air, the queen of her aluminum tube. She was assisted by James Rodriguez, the kind-looking older man who worked the front galley, and Lisa Garcia, the young woman shadowing Vanessa's every move and expression. Lisa was clearly a follower eager to please her mentor. From his vantage point, Anthony observed how Vanessa's demeanor transformed completely when she entered first class. Her smile became genuine, her posture more attentive. She leaned in to speak with passengers, remembered names, touched shoulders lightly. It was like watching an actor step into a different role entirely. In economy, she was efficient, but remote, avoiding eye contact, her movements perfunctory. These subtle differences might have been invisible to most passengers, but to Anthony, whose job required him to notice patterns of behavior, they told a complete story of institutional bias. He pulled out his notebook, an old habit from his early days at the FAA before everything went digital. Some observations still felt more real when written by hand. Without making it obvious, he began documenting times, names, specific comments. Not because he was looking for trouble, but because documentation was second nature to him. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration began, Lisa leading the motions while Vanessa narrated with practiced precision. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Anthony caught a glimpse of Kimberly checking her glucose monitor discreetly. The reading made her frown slightly. The stress of travel could affect her levels, and he made a mental note to check on her as soon as the seatbelt sign went off. 5 minutes until revelation. 90 minutes into the flight, the drink service began. By the time the cart reached Kimberly, she was already starting to feel the telltale signs. The long shift, the stress at the gate, the cramped seat, her blood sugar was beginning to dip. She felt the first tremor in her hands, the light sheen of cold sweat. "Ma'am, drink?" Lisa asked, not unkindly. "Yes, please. Could I have a full can of orange juice and a Biscoff cookie if you have it?" Kimberly asked, her voice quiet but urgent. Lisa nodded and was about to reach for it when Vanessa glided up from behind, placing a manicured hand on the cart. "Lisa, dear, you're being too generous," Vanessa said loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "The full cans are reserved for our Comfort Plus and first-class passengers. Standard Economy gets a half-cup pour." She turned her smile on Kimberly. "It's policy. We have to make sure we have enough for everyone." "I understand," Kimberly said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I'm diabetic. My sugar is dropping. I really do need the full can." Vanessa's smile tightened. She leaned in conspiratorially. "Oh, honey, if I had $1 for every time someone on a basic fare suddenly developed a medical condition to get an extra snack, I'd be sitting in first class with them." She poured a small cup of juice, perhaps 3 ounces, and handed it to Kimberly with a saccharine smile. "This should tide you over until we come through with the snack basket in about an hour." Kimberly took the cup, her hand now visibly shaking. "Please," she said, her professional composure slipping. "I really am diabetic. I can show you my medical ID bracelet." Vanessa had already moved on, her back turned. Lisa hesitated, looking genuinely concerned, but a sharp glance from Vanessa sent her back to distributing napkins. 3 rows back, Anthony watched the exchange with growing concern. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language perfectly. He knew that look on his wife's face, the mix of medical urgency and personal dignity warring with each other. He unfastened his seatbelt, ready to intervene. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is still illuminated." Vanessa called out, spotting him immediately. Her voice carried the authoritative edge of someone used to being obeyed. "You'll need to remain seated." The teenager next to Anthony muttered, "Dude, she's hardcore." Anthony settled back, his mind racing through options. He could create a scene, demand attention for his wife, but years of professional experience had taught him that documentation and procedure would ultimately be more effective than emotion. He watched Kimberly drink the small cup of juice, knowing it wouldn't be enough. Across the aisle from Kimberly, a woman in her 30s with a stylish bob haircut was watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. Rachel Torres, a social media manager from San Diego, had her phone casually positioned on her tray table, the camera subtly angled toward the aisle. William Baker, a 65-year-old retired teacher, seated one row ahead, turned slightly, his eyes meeting Kimberly's with quiet sympathy. As a black man who had traveled extensively throughout his career, he recognized the pattern playing out behind him. 3 minutes until revelation. Rachel Torres had built her career understanding what captured public attention. As Global Airways' self-proclaimed Queen of the Skies continued her performance, Rachel's thumb silently activated the record button. This wasn't voyeurism. It was documentation of something she had witnessed too often in her frequent travels. "Excuse me," Rachel called out as Vanessa passed by. "I think the woman behind me really does need more juice. She looks unwell." Vanessa's smile never faltered, but her eyes hardened. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm trained to recognize actual medical emergencies. This isn't one." 3 rows forward in the Comfort Plus section, Edward Collins, a 52-year-old investment banker, remained blissfully unaware of the situation unfolding in economy. His noise-canceling headphones and Wall Street Journal created the perfect bubble of privilege, exactly as designed by the airline's class-stratified service model. William Baker removed his glasses, using the motion to turn more fully toward Kimberly. "Are you all right, dear?" he asked quietly. "I have some orange juice from breakfast in my bag if you need it." The young mother beside Kimberly had also noticed her shaking hands. "Is there something I can do?" she whispered. Sophia Mitchell, a 40-year-old high school counselor in seat 39C, had been watching with increasing concern. When she saw Kimberly's hands trembling more violently, she stood up. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying the clear authority of someone used to managing cafeteria crises. "This woman needs medical attention. She's clearly hypoglycemic." Vanessa pivoted smoothly, her practiced customer service mask sliding perfectly into place. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. The seatbelt sign is illuminated and we have a medical situation under control." "You don't have anything under control," Sophia retorted. "I've worked with diabetic students for 15 years. She needs sugar immediately." James Rodriguez had noticed the commotion from the forward galley. Unlike Vanessa, whose entire approach was shaped by corporate metrics and unofficial passenger hierarchies, James had joined the airline when service still meant serving all passengers. He grabbed a can of orange juice and began making his way down the aisle. Lisa Garcia, caught in the middle, looked increasingly uncomfortable. She had joined Global Airways with genuine excitement about helping people travel safely. In training, however, she had quickly learned that advancement depended on following the unwritten rules, and Vanessa Phillips wrote those rules with iron certainty. Vanessa hissed, "Handle 38B while I deal with this disruption." She gestured toward Sophia, who remained standing. Rachel's phone continued recording, capturing every word, every expression. William Baker was now half standing in his seat, supporting himself on the headrest, his dignified face lined with concern. Other passengers had begun to notice conversations quieting as the drama unfolded. "Is there a doctor on board?" someone called out from the back. The irony that Kimberly herself was a doctor, one whose hands had saved countless children, hung in the air unacknowledged. 90 seconds until revelation. Kimberly's vision began to blur at the edges. The small cup of juice hadn't been nearly enough to raise her blood sugar. As a doctor, she recognized the dangerous progression of symptoms, the cold sweat now drenching her scrubs beneath her sweatshirt, the tremors intensifying the confusion beginning to cloud her thinking. "I need my bag," she managed to say, pointing weakly to the carry-on stowed under the seat in front of her. It contained her emergency glucose tablets and monitoring equipment. Lisa approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, what do you need exactly? Glucose? In front pocket." Kimberly's words were becoming slurred, a terrifying symptom she recognized even through her increasing mental fog. Lisa reached for the bag, but Vanessa intercepted her. "The fasten seatbelt sign is still on," Vanessa stated firmly. "Passengers cannot access their bags during this time. It's an FAA regulation." The irony of her invoking FAA regulations while endangering a passenger would soon come full circle. William Baker had had enough. He stood fully now, his tall frame commanding attention despite his age. "Young lady," he addressed Vanessa, his voice carrying the weight of decades teaching unruly teenagers that woman is having a medical emergency. "FAA regulations also require you to provide assistance in such situations. Sir, please return to your seat immediately." Vanessa snapped her patience, clearly wearing thin. Sophia Mitchell had pulled an emergency glucose gel from her purse carried for her diabetic students on field trips and was attempting to pass it forward to Kimberly when Vanessa blocked her path. "Ma'am, unauthorized food items." "This isn't food," Sophia interrupted, her voice rising. "It's emergency medical glucose for diabetics. She needs it now." The young mother next to Kimberly had begun filming too, her maternal instincts triggered by the medical distress beside her. "This isn't right," she said to no one in particular. "This just isn't right." Kimberly's head lolled slightly, her consciousness beginning to fade, a dangerous sign that her blood glucose had dropped to critically low levels. Severe hypoglycemia could lead to seizures, coma, even death if untreated. As a physician, she knew this. As a patient, she was terrifyingly powerless to communicate it. James had finally reached their row orange juice can in hand when Vanessa stepped into his path. "James, return to your station," she ordered. "I have this under control." "Vanessa, she needs—" "Return to your station," Vanessa repeated, her voice leaving no room for discussion. "Or I'll note insubordination in my flight report." James hesitated 15 years of following the chain of command warring with basic human decency. The corporate hierarchy ultimately won. He retreated though his face showed his internal conflict. At this point, multiple passengers were recording the incident having escalated beyond a customer service issue to a potential medical emergency. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed from the usual travel tedium to a tense standoff with Vanessa Phillips as the immovable obstacle between a passenger in distress and the help she desperately needed. 30 seconds until revelation. Anthony Reynolds had watched the situation deteriorate with mounting concern. When he saw his wife's head loll forward, his decision was made. Some things transcended professional protocol. Some moments required immediate action. As he unbuckled his seatbelt, a memory flashed through his mind. His grandmother, Eloise Reynolds, standing in the rain outside Gate 17 at O'Hare International, being told her ticket didn't look right despite having a confirmed reservation. She had missed her sister's funeral because of that gate agent's suspicion. Anthony had been just 12 years old, watching helplessly as his proud grandmother was humiliated and denied boarding. "I'm going to fix this one day, Grandma," he had promised her later. The next day, she had shown him an article about the FAA and its role in overseeing airline operations. "You want to make change. Anthony, you go to where the rules are made." 26 years later, Anthony moved deliberately up the aisle, his Howard University hoodie marking him as exactly the kind of passenger Vanessa Phillips had been trained to dismiss. But beneath that hoodie was the weight of federal authority that would soon upend her entire understanding of power. "Sir, return to your seat immediately," Vanessa commanded as she spotted him approaching. The cabin had grown eerily quiet. Even the infant who had been fussing earlier seemed to sense the tension falling silent against its mother's chest. The only sounds were the engine's steady hum and the increasingly labored breathing of Dr. Kimberly Reynolds. "My wife needs medical attention." Anthony stated, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable tone of someone used to being heated. "She's experiencing severe hypoglycemia." Vanessa stepped directly into his path, using her body to block his access to row 38. "Sir, if you don't return to your seat, I'll have the captain divert this flight and have you removed by security for interfering with a flight crew member. That's a federal offense." The irony was not lost on Anthony. Rachel Torres's phone captured Vanessa's finger jabbing toward Anthony's chest as she continued. "You budget travelers are all the same. You think the rules don't apply to you. You think you can claim medical emergencies whenever it's convenient." Anthony didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My name is Anthony Reynolds, Senior Compliance Inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, badge number 34721. 7 seconds until revelation." The badge appeared in his hand, gold and official, catching the cabin lights in a way that made it seem to glow. "And you have just violated Title 14 of the Federal Code of Regulations, Parts 91-121, and the Air Carrier Access Act by willfully denying medical accommodation to a passenger with a documented disability." Every word was measured precise, delivered with the practiced calm of someone who had spent years documenting violations just like this one. "This aircraft is now under federal regulatory review and will not be cleared for continued operation until a full safety and compliance inspection has been completed." The silence that followed was absolute. Not a cough, not a whisper, just the dull hum of the air circulation system as reality crashed down around Vanessa Phillips like a collapsing sky. The color drained from her face, leaving nothing but the bright red of her lipstick like a wound on white paper. The clipboard she'd been clutching fell from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the cabin floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the stunned silence. As she began, but no further words emerged. Rachel Torres's steady hand captured the moment perfectly. The revelation, the shock, the instant transfer of power that occurred when Anthony Reynolds revealed his true identity. "Oh my God," someone whispered from the back of the cabin. Lisa Garcia's eyes widened to perfect circles, her gaze darting between Anthony and Vanessa as the implications registered. James Rodriguez stepped forward from where he'd been hovering nearby, the can of orange juice still in his hand. Sir James addressed Anthony with newfound respect. "Please let me help your wife immediately." Anthony nodded, moving past the still frozen Vanessa. "She needs sugar now. She's a type 1 diabetic in severe hypoglycemia." As if released from a spell, the cabin erupted into motion. Sophia Mitchell pushed forward with her glucose gel. William Baker retrieved his own juice. The young mother beside Kimberly supported her head while James opened the can. Vanessa remained rooted to the spot, her perfectly constructed world of authority and passenger hierarchy collapsing around her. In the space of 7 seconds, she had gone from absolute ruler of her domain to a regulatory violator facing potential career-ending consequences. "I was just following," she attempted weakly. "Company policy." Anthony finished for her, his voice level but carrying clearly through the cabin. "Then that policy is in direct violation of federal aviation regulations and the Air Carrier Access Act." As he knelt beside Kimberly, helping her drink the orange juice that James now offered, Anthony continued addressing Vanessa without looking at her. "I'll need the captain to meet me in the cabin immediately. This flight is now under FAA review." Lisa's hand shook as she reached for the interphone. "Captain, your presence is requested in the main cabin. Immediately." Rachel Torres, still recording, whispered into her phone. "Global Airways flight attendant denies medical help to diabetic passenger, then discovers her husband is an FAA inspector." This is happening live. Within seconds, her first upload hit social media, beginning a chain reaction that would ultimately reach millions. The revelation had taken exactly 7 seconds. The repercussions would last for years. The transformation was immediate and visible, like watching a wave of realization ripple through the cabin. Captain Michael Thompson appeared from the cockpit, his expression shifting from irritation to concern as he took in the scene. At 55, with silver-streaked hair and the confident bearing of a 20-year veteran pilot, he had handled his share of in-flight incidents. But the letters FAA changed everything. Captain Anthony said, still supporting Kimberly as her glucose levels slowly began to rise. "I'm Anthony Reynolds, FAA Compliance Inspector. Your lead flight attendant has violated multiple federal regulations regarding passenger safety and medical accommodation. I need to speak with you privately once my wife is stabilized." Captain Thompson assessed the situation quickly, his eyes moving from Kimberly's pale face to the still frozen Vanessa to the multiple passengers recording the incident. "Of course, Inspector Reynolds. Whatever you need." He turned to James. "Mr. Rodriguez, please take over as lead cabin attendant effective immediately. Ms. Phillips, please station yourself in the rear galley until further notice." Vanessa didn't move, seemingly unable to process the catastrophic shift in her status. Miss Phillips, the captain, repeated more firmly, "Rear galley." "Now." She finally moved, walking stiffly toward the back of the aircraft, her eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding the gazes of passengers who were now openly staring. Many had their phones out, recording her retreat. Lisa approached hesitantly. "Sir Inspector, I'm so sorry. I should have. I didn't." Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of fear for her job and genuine remorse. "Your name?" Anthony asked, his tone professional but not unkind. "Lisa Garcia, sir." "Ms. Garcia, I'll need a statement from you later. For now, please assist Mr. Rodriguez in providing proper care to all passengers." She nodded quickly and hurried to follow James, who was already retrieving the aircraft's emergency medical kit. Sophia Mitchell knelt beside Kimberly, her experience with diabetic students evident in her confident movements. "How are you feeling now? Any improvement?" Kimberly nodded weakly, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," she managed. "The glucose is helping." William Baker had retrieved Kimberly's bag from under the seat, finding her continuous glucose monitor and insulin supplies. "My sister is diabetic," he explained, handling the equipment with familiar ease. Rachel Torres had stepped into the aisle, her social media expertise now deployed for something more important than brand engagement. I've documented everything she told Anthony quietly. The denial of medical care, her comments about budget travelers, the delay in response. It's all recorded if you need it for your report. Anthony nodded his thanks, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the personal nature of the emergency. "I appreciate that, Ms. Torres." Rachel Torres. Other passengers began sharing their observations, each one adding to the mounting evidence against both Vanessa Phillips and Global Airways' treatment of economy passengers. "She did the same thing on my flight last month," one woman called out. "I saw her give full cans to everyone in first class, then deny them back here," added another. The young mother who had been seated next to Kimberly spoke up. "She refused to help me with my baby's bottle earlier. Said it wasn't her job to assist with personal matters. What had begun as one incident was rapidly expanding into a pattern of behavior, all being captured in real time by multiple witnesses. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Now it was Vanessa Phillips who was isolated, her authority stripped away, while the passengers she had dismissed found their collective voice. Captain Thompson observed this tide of testimonials with growing concern. As a pilot, his primary responsibility was flight safety, but the wider implications for the airline were becoming clear. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a potential public relations disaster unfolding at 35,000 feet. "Inspector Reynolds," he said quietly, "perhaps we should continue this discussion in the forward galley." Anthony looked at his wife, who nodded that she was stable. "I'll be right back," he assured her, then followed the captain forward. Behind them, the cabin buzzed with conversation passengers comparing experiences, sharing footage, and forming the beginnings of a narrative that would soon escape the confines of Flight 1207 to reach a global audience. In the center of the cabin, proper medical attention finally surrounded Kimberly. James Rodriguez had taken command of the situation with the calm efficiency of a veteran flight attendant who remembered when passenger care was the primary mission. "Dr. Reynolds," he addressed her, having learned her profession from Anthony, "we have a full medical kit on board. What do you need?" Kimberly, her speech becoming clearer as her blood sugar stabilized, managed a small smile. "Just monitoring for now. The juice and glucose gel are working." She glanced at her continuous glucose monitor, which William Baker had helped retrieve from her bag. "Levels rising. Should be back to normal range soon." Lisa Garcia hovered nearby, mortification and concern battling across her features. She had started this flight shadowing Vanessa, absorbing her attitudes and approaches. Now she watched James instead, noting the difference in his patient-centered care. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" she asked Kimberly, her voice small but sincere. "Some water, please," Kimberly responded. "And maybe a protein snack if you have one. It helps stabilize after a hypoglycemic episode." Lisa nodded eagerly and hurried to the galley, relieved to have a constructive task. Sophia Mitchell remained beside Kimberly, her counselor's instincts making her a reassuring presence. "That was pretty scary," she said conversationally, helping to normalize the situation. "Has that happened before during flights?" "Not this severely," Kimberly admitted. "Usually I'm better prepared. The stress at boarding being separated from Anthony. It affected my levels more than I anticipated." William Baker patted her hand gently. "My sister's been managing diabetes for 40 years. Travel days are always the trickiest." The young mother with the infant had created space by moving to a newly offered seat, but she called over, "I'm so glad you're okay. I was really worried." What was unfolding now was the exact opposite of what had occurred earlier. Strangers connecting with genuine concern, offering help without judgment, creating community rather than reinforcing hierarchy. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. A man in a business suit approached from the front of the plane. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Kimberly directly. "I'm Dr. Harold Wilson. I'm a cardiologist. I heard there was a medical situation." "Thank you for offering," Kimberly replied professionally. "I'm Dr. Kimberly Reynolds, pediatric surgeon. I'm managing a hypoglycemic episode, but it's resolving now." Dr. Wilson nodded, respecting her expertise. "If you need anything at all, I'm in 12A. A simple offer of collegial support with none of the skepticism Vanessa had shown. Lisa returned with water, a protein bar, and a full can of juice. For later, she explained in case you need it. Kimberly thanked her, recognizing the young woman's attempt to make amends. As a surgeon who trained residents, she understood the impact of mentorship, both positive and negative. Lisa had been following a toxic example. Now she was seeing an alternative. James had reorganized the cabin slightly, ensuring Kimberly had more space and moving Anthony's belongings to the now empty seat beside his wife. He worked with quiet efficiency, prioritizing passenger well-being over rigid adherence to seat assignments. "Dr. Reynolds, your husband's things are here, and I've noted in our system that you two must remain seated together for the remainder of the flight due to medical necessity." The irony that it had taken a federal investigation to achieve what should have been a simple accommodation wasn't lost on anyone. As Kimberly's condition stabilized, the immediate medical crisis passed, but the aftershocks continued to ripple through the cabin. Passengers who had witnessed the incident were still discussing it, still recording statements, still processing what they had seen. In the rear galley, Vanessa Phillips stood alone, staring at nothing, her career flashing before her eyes. In the forward galley, Captain Michael Thompson faced Anthony Reynolds with the measured caution of someone confronting an unexploded device. "Inspector Reynolds," he began, keeping his voice low, "I want to assure you that what you witnessed is not reflective of global airways standards or policies." Anthony maintained his professional demeanor. "Captain Thompson, I appreciate that sentiment, but my concern right now is documenting the violations that occurred and ensuring my wife receives appropriate care for the remainder of the flight. The captain nodded, understanding that platitudes would not suffice. Of course. Whatever you need. I need 3 things immediately, Anthony said, his voice calm but authoritative. First, I need access to Ms. Phillips' service record and any previous passenger complaints. Second, I need a list of all crew members on this flight along with their certification numbers. And third, I need your assurance that my wife will receive proper medical monitoring for the duration of this flight. Captain Thompson hesitated only briefly. The first request might require headquarters access, but I can certainly provide the crew list and guarantee appropriate medical attention. Captain Anthony said, meeting his eyes directly. I believe you understand the severity of what transpired. A passenger with a documented medical condition was denied care based on her seating class and appearance. That constitutes a direct violation of federal regulations. The captain's expression tightened. I understand, Inspector. Furthermore, Anthony continued the fact that Ms. Phillips specifically invoked FAA regulations to justify denying my wife access to her medical supplies indicates either a profound misunderstanding of those regulations or a willful misrepresentation of them. Neither is acceptable for a lead flight attendant. I agree completely, Thompson replied, recognizing that full cooperation was his only viable option. What do you need me to do right now? Make an announcement informing passengers that there's been a change in cabin leadership. Mr. Rodriguez will be taking over as lead attendant. Then contact your operations center and inform them that this flight is under FAA review upon arrival. They'll need to have appropriate representatives meet the aircraft. Captain Thompson processed this, understanding the implications. An FAA review meant potential fines, possible certification issues, and certainly media attention, especially given the social media documentation already underway in the cabin. May I ask, he ventured carefully, if you'll be filing a formal report? Anthony's expression remained neutral. Captain, I was on vacation with my wife when a Global Airways employee denied her medical care and mocked budget travelers for expecting basic human dignity. What do you think? The captain nodded, accepting the inevitable. I'll make the announcement and contact operations immediately. As Thompson moved toward the interphone, First Officer David Marshall appeared at the cockpit door. Captain, is everything all right? Lisa seemed pretty upset when she called. David, this is FAA Inspector Anthony Reynolds, Thompson explained quietly. We have a situation involving Vanessa and a passenger medical emergency. I need you to maintain control of the aircraft while I handle this. The first officer's eyes widened slightly at FAA Inspector, but he maintained his composure. Yes, sir. Anything I should know operationally? Just that we'll have a reception committee when we land in Honolulu. Company representatives, possibly media. Marshall nodded and returned to the cockpit, leaving Captain Thompson to make the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Thompson speaking. I want to inform you that Mr. Rodriguez will be serving as your lead flight attendant for the remainder of our journey today. Please direct any needs or concerns to him or to Ms. Garcia. We appreciate your patience and understanding. The carefully worded announcement avoided mentioning Vanessa or the incident, but the passengers knew exactly what had happened. A murmur ran through the cabin, part satisfaction, part anticipation of what might come next. As the captain returned to Anthony, his expression was resigned. Inspector Reynolds, our operations center is being notified now. They'll arrange for appropriate representatives to meet us in Honolulu. Thank you, Captain, Anthony replied. Now I'd like to check on my wife and then begin documenting the incident formally. As they parted, Anthony knew that Captain Thompson would be on the radio to company headquarters the moment he returned to the cockpit. Global Airways damage control machinery would already be spinning up, preparing for the storm that awaited them in Hawaii. What none of them could know yet was that Rachel Torres's first video had already been viewed 50,000 times and was climbing rapidly. Back at Kimberly's side, Anthony found her color much improved, her eyes clear again. The protein bar and juice had done their work. "You didn't have to shut down an entire airline for me," she whispered with the hint of a smile. "I didn't," he replied, taking her hand. Just one flight attendant who needed a reminder about what real power looks like. Around them, the cabin had reorganized itself. James Rodriguez moved efficiently through the aisle, checking on passengers, his manner professional, but warmer than Vanessa's had ever been. Lisa Garcia followed, learning from his example, her earlier nervousness replaced by determined attention to detail. Anthony pulled out his tablet, the modern version of his old notebook, and opened the official FAA incident reporting application. Years of training kicked in as he began methodically documenting every aspect of what had occurred, times, statements, specific regulations violated. Rachel Torres approached their row, her manner respectful. "Inspector Reynolds, I have video documentation of the entire incident starting from when your wife first requested juice. I'd be happy to provide it for your report." "Thank you, Ms. Torres. That would be very helpful." Anthony provided his official email address, maintaining proper protocol despite the personal nature of the situation. William Baker leaned forward from his seat. "I'd like to provide a statement as well. I witnessed Ms. Phillips' behavior from the beginning." Sophia Mitchell joined in. "Me too. I heard her comments about budget travelers and saw her block access to medical supplies. One by one, passengers came forward offering their observations, contact information, and in many cases, video evidence. Anthony collected each statement methodically, building a comprehensive record that would be difficult to dismiss or minimize. Lisa approached hesitantly. "Inspector Reynolds, I'd like to make a statement too." Anthony looked up, his expression neutral. "You understand that your statement may be used in proceedings against your colleague and possibly your employer?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir. I understand. But what happened? It wasn't right. And it wasn't the first time." This caught Anthony's attention. Not the first time. Lisa glanced around nervously, then lowered her voice. "Vanessa has a reputation among the crew. She calls economy passengers the cattle class when we're in private. She's trained several of us to prioritize certain passengers over others." Based on what criteria, Anthony asked, although he suspected he knew the answer. "Ticket class, mainly. But also appearance." Lisa couldn't meet his eyes. "She told me to watch for certain types who might cause trouble or make excessive demands." "And what types would those be?" Ms. Garcia Lisa's voice dropped to a whisper. "People who don't look like they belong in first class. People who might be using points or got lucky with an upgrade." Anthony nodded, adding this to his notes. "I appreciate your honesty, Ms. Garcia. That couldn't have been easy." "It's not right," she repeated more firmly this time. "I became a flight attendant to help people, not to judge them." As Lisa returned to her duties, James Rodriguez approached next. "Inspector, I've been flying for 20 years, he said quietly. "What you saw today isn't new, but it's gotten worse. There's been a shift in company culture over the past 5 years. More emphasis on metrics, less on actual service." "What kind of metrics?" Anthony asked. "Time spent with economy passengers versus premium cabins. Minimizing unnecessary accommodations to reduce costs. They don't say it directly, but the message is clear. Some passengers matter more than others." This aligned with what Anthony had observed across the industry, a growing stratification that went beyond reasonable service differences to fundamental issues of dignity and safety. "Would you be willing to provide a formal statement to that effect, Mr. Rodriguez?" The veteran flight attendant straightened his shoulders. "Yes, sir. It's time someone did." As Anthony continued documenting, Kimberly observed the process with the keen eye of someone who understood institutional practices. As a surgeon, she had seen how hospital policies could either support or undermine patient care. What was happening on Flight 1207 wasn't just about one flight attendant's behavior, It was about a culture that enabled and rewarded that behavior. "It's never just one person, is it?" she said quietly to Anthony. He shook his head. "Rarely. Individual actions usually reflect institutional priorities." By the time they were 3 hours into the flight, Anthony had compiled initial statements from 12 passengers and 2 crew members. He had video evidence from 7 different angles. He had specific violations documented with timestamps and witnesses. In the rear galley, Vanessa Phillips remained isolated, her phone now blowing up with notifications as the first social media posts about the incident reached her colleagues. Her perfectly constructed professional identity was unraveling in real time, thread by thread, post by post. The documentation was damning thorough and growing by the minute. Flight 1207 had transformed from a routine journey to a case study in accountability that would soon have implications far beyond this single aircraft. As Flight 1207 began its descent into Honolulu International Airport, the atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. What should have been excited anticipation of tropical vacation had become a collective holding of breath passengers, sensing they were part of something significant unfolding in real time. Captain Thompson's voice came over the intercom, professional but tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Honolulu. Local time is 2:17 p.m. with clear skies and temperatures of 82 degrees. We'll be parking at Gate 26. Please remain seated after arrival as some passengers will be deplaning first." The subtext was clear to everyone on board. Anthony had spent the remainder of the flight completing his preliminary report-gathering statements and ensuring Kimberly's condition remained stable. Now, as they prepared for landing, he turned to his wife. "How are you feeling now?" Kimberly checked her glucose monitor. "Stable. Normal range." She looked up at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and lingering concern. "What happens when we land? Company representatives will meet the aircraft. There will be statements, probably media. I'll need to file my initial report before we can continue to the hotel." She nodded, understanding the procedural requirements of his position. "So much for starting our vacation with Mai Tais on the beach." He squeezed her hand. "We'll get there. Just a slight detour through corporate accountability first." As the aircraft touched down and taxied toward the gate, passengers began gathering their belongings while stealing glances toward both Anthony and the rear galley where Vanessa remained isolated. The story had already escaped the confines of the airplane. Rachel Torres's videos had collectively gathered over 300,000 views and were being picked up by travel blogs and news sites. When the aircraft reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, Captain Thompson appeared from the cockpit. "Inspector Reynolds," he said. "Approaching their row, company representatives are waiting in the jet bridge. Would you prefer to deplane first or last?" "First would be appreciated, Captain. My wife should avoid further stress." The captain nodded. "Of course." He turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your patience as we'll be conducting a special deplaning process today. Once the doors open, please remain seated until announced." As the door opened, Anthony could see the reception committee waiting in the jet bridge, 4 individuals in corporate attire, their expressions a studied blend of concern and damage control. Beyond them, visible through the terminal windows, news vans had already gathered on the tarmac. "Ready?" he asked Kimberly. She straightened her shoulders, the same posture she adopted before entering a difficult surgery. "Ready." They made their way to the front of the aircraft, Anthony nodding acknowledgments to the passengers who had provided statements. As they reached the door, James Rodriguez stepped forward. "Dr. Reynolds, Inspector," he said quietly. "Thank you." Anthony shook his hand. "Expect a call from my office, Mr. Rodriguez. Your professionalism didn't go unnoticed." As they stepped into the jet bridge, the Global Airways representatives moved forward immediately. Inspector Reynolds, began a woman in a charcoal suit. "I'm Jennifer Lawson, Vice President of Customer Experience for Global Airways." On behalf of our entire company, I want to express our deepest apologies for the incident aboard Flight 1207. Anthony maintained his professional demeanor. Ms. Lawson, I appreciate the sentiment, but my immediate concern is completing my official report and getting my wife to our hotel so she can rest. A man in a Navy suit stepped forward next. David Hoffman, Global Airways Legal Department. We've arranged a private room in the terminal where we can discuss this matter and address any concerns you may have. Mr. Hoffman, there's nothing to discuss at this point. I'll be filing my preliminary report with the FAA within the hour. Global Airways will receive formal notification of any findings and potential penalties through official channels. The corporate team exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for Anthony's refusal to engage in their preferred closed-door process. Perhaps we could at least provide you with transportation to your hotel, offered a third representative. A private car is waiting. Kimberly stepped forward. Thank you, but we've already arranged our own transportation. As they moved past the corporate barricade, they encountered the first wave of media local Honolulu reporters alerted by the social media explosion. Inspector Reynolds. Can you comment on what happened aboard Flight 1207? Dr. Reynolds. Is it true you were denied medical care because you were seated in economy? Anthony placed a protective arm around Kimberly. No comment at this time. Please respect our privacy. Airport security personnel moved in, creating a path for them through the terminal. Behind them, they could hear the corporate representatives attempting to manage the situation with prepared statements about isolated incidents and ongoing investigations. What was meant to be an anonymous arrival in paradise had become something else entirely, the beginning of a reckoning that would extend far beyond one flight attendant's momentary power trip. As they reached the rental car counter, Kimberly finally allowed her professional composure to slip slightly. I just wanted a vacation, she said, her voice betraying her exhaustion. Anthony pulled her close. And you'll get one. The best damn vacation. But first we made sure someone who needed a lesson in humanity got one. Outside the terminal, their phones buzzed simultaneously with breaking news alerts. FAA investigation launched after Global Airways. Flight attendant denies medical care to diabetic passenger in economy class. Their quiet Hawaiian getaway had just become the catalyst for a national conversation about dignity discrimination and the increasingly stratified world of commercial air travel. In the executive conference room of Global Airways' Honolulu Operations Center, emergency damage control efforts were already underway. The sleek room with its panoramic views of aircraft movements might normally inspire corporate pride. Today it felt like a war room. Robert Davidson, 58. Global Airways CEO stood at the head of the table, his tailored suit and silver hair projecting an image of control that was increasingly at odds with reality. On the wall-mounted screens, social media feeds scrolled with damning hashtags, hashtag Global Airways, discrimination, #budget tickets, matter. FAA Inspector, what exactly are we dealing with here? Davidson demanded, his voice tight with the strain of maintaining executive composure. Jennifer Lawson, VP of Customer Experience, looked up from her tablet. The videos are problematic, sir. Multiple angles show our lead flight attendant, Vanessa Phillips, denying medical assistance to a diabetic passenger, Dr. Kimberly Reynolds. When her husband identified himself as an FAA inspector, Ms. Phillips appeared to... well, there's no other way to put this. She froze completely. How many views? Davidson asked. David Hoffman, the legal counsel, grimaced. The main video just crossed 1 million. 3 others are above 500,000. CNN and MSNBC have picked it up. Fox News is running with federal inspector catches airline discrimination mid-flight. Jesus Christ, muttered Davidson. And the inspector. What do we know about him? Anthony Reynolds supplied Thomas Warren, VP of Operations. 15 years with the FAA impeccable record. Previously worked in their Civil Rights Division before transferring to Safety Compliance. Exactly the wrong person to cross. Davidson paced the length of the conference table. And his wife, Dr. Kimberly Reynolds, is a pediatric surgeon at Los Angeles Children's Hospital, award-winning, respected in her field. They were beginning a 2-week vacation. So we managed to discriminate against a federal inspector's wife who happens to be a pediatric surgeon, Davidson summarized flatly. Please tell me there's something here we can use. Anything? The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sir Jennifer ventured the videos clearly show Ms. Phillips making comments about budget travelers and questioning Dr. Reynolds' medical condition. There's really no way to spin this. What about Phillips? Where is she now? In a holding room downstairs, Thomas replied. She's not taking this well. I need 5 minutes with her, Davidson decided. Then we need a statement, something that acknowledges the situation without admitting liability. David Hoffman cleared his throat. Sir, given that Inspector Reynolds is already filing an official report, I'd advise against any statement that contradicts what's clearly visible in the videos. We're looking at potential regulatory fines, possible civil litigation, and significant reputational damage. Our best approach may be full acknowledgement and immediate corrective action. Davidson's expression hardened. Corrective action means firing Phillips. Is that what you're suggesting? It's a starting point, Hoffman replied carefully. But Inspector Reynolds' documentation suggests this may be a more pervasive issue within our service model. Meaning Jennifer pulled up an email on her tablet. We've received whistleblower statements from 2 crew members on Flight 1207. James Rodriguez and Lisa Garcia both allege that our service metrics and informal training practices encourage differential treatment based on ticket class. That's ridiculous, Davidson snapped. We provide appropriate service levels based on fare class. Every airline does, Sir Thomas said quietly. They're specifically referencing our performance enhancement program, the one that rewards cabin crew for minimizing what we call unnecessary accommodations in economy class. A heavy silence fell over the room. Our stock is down 4.6%, already noted the CFO speaking for the first time. If this keeps escalating. Davidson moved to the window, staring out at the aircraft bearing his company's livery. Each one represented millions in investment, thousands of jobs, decades of brand building, all now threatened by 7 minutes of video showing the ugliest side of his airline's culture. Options he demanded without turning. Give me options. We terminate Phillips, immediately issue a full apology, and announce a comprehensive review of our service policies, Jennifer suggested. We offer a significant settlement to the Reynolds family to mitigate potential litigation, added Hoffman. We implement immediate retraining for all customer-facing staff, Thomas contributed. Davidson turned back to face his executive team. Do all of that, and get me a direct line to Inspector Reynolds. I want to speak with him personally. Sir Hoffman cautioned any direct communication with an active FAA investigator could be, I'm not asking Davidson cut him off. This needs a personal touch, one that makes it clear we understand the severity while ensuring he knows we're taking immediate action. As the meeting continued, a notification appeared on Jennifer's tablet. She paled visibly. Sir, a new development. A passenger from Flight 1207 just posted internal training materials apparently provided by Lisa Garcia. They include specific instructions for flight attendants on how to discourage excessive accommodation requests from basic economy passengers. Davidson stared at her for a long moment. Get me every document from that program, every email, every training slide, every performance metric. If we're going to survive this, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. The damage control machinery was spinning at full capacity, but the executives in that room were beginning to realize an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes damage can't be controlled, only acknowledged and repaired. And repair would require dismantling systems that had been deliberately designed to create the very conditions that had exploded on Flight 1207. Rachel Torres knew exactly what she was witnessing as she edited and posted her videos from Flight 1207. As a social media manager for major brands, she understood virality narrative framing and the power of authentic moments captured in real time. Her first post was strategically simple watch as at Global Airways flight attendant denies juice to diabetic passenger in economy, then discovers her husband is an FAA inspector, her flight from hell, car justice. The 38-second clip showed the key moment: Vanessa Phillips dismissively providing a tiny cup of juice, Kimberly's visible trembling, and Anthony's revelation of his FAA badge. It was perfectly crafted to evoke outrage while remaining factually accurate. Within an hour, the video had been shared by @Passenger Shaming, @Aviatio Daily, and dozens of travel influencers. Within 2 hours, it had been picked up by TMZ and The Points Guy. By the time Flight 1207 landed in Honolulu, CNN was running the story in their travel segment. In her hotel room, Rachel fielded calls from major news outlets while continuing to release additional footage showing different angles of the incident. Her follower count had jumped from 12,000 to over 100,000 in less than 5 hours. "This isn't about going viral," she explained to a Good Morning America producer over the phone. "This is about accountability. I've witnessed this kind of treatment before but never had such clear documentation of it." Across social media platforms, the videos triggered an outpouring of similar stories from travelers, particularly those from minority groups who had experienced dismissive treatment, medical neglect, or outright discrimination on commercial flights. The hashtag budget passengers matter began trending alongside hashtag Global Airways, fail, and hashtag flying while black. Travel bloggers and influencers began sharing their own experiences of class-based discrimination in the skies. Former Global Airways employees seized the moment to speak out. A flood of anonymous posts appeared on industry forums describing internal policies that allegedly encouraged staff to minimize services for economy passengers. "We were literally told to manage expectations for basic economy," wrote one former flight attendant. "That was code for make them feel lucky to get anything at all." Another posted, "There were unofficial problem passenger profiles in our training." Read between the lines, it was about keeping certain types in their place. By evening, cable news panels were discussing broader issues of discrimination in commercial aviation, the increasing stratification of air travel experiences, and the regulatory frameworks that were supposed to prevent exactly what had happened to Dr. Kimberly Reynolds. On financial news networks, analysts discussed the potential impact on Global Airways' stock price and brand value. "This kind of incident can cost an airline millions in direct penalties, and far more in lost business," explained one aviation industry expert. The FAA doesn't take discrimination lightly, especially when it involves denial of medical care. The story continued to evolve as more details emerged. When Lisa Garcia's leaked training materials hit Twitter showing specific scripts for denying accommodations to economy passengers, the narrative shifted from one rogue flight attendant to questions about corporate culture and policy. A particularly damning slide titled "Managing Resource Distribution" explicitly instructed flight attendants to prioritize comfort and convenience for premium cabin passengers and maintain basic service levels for economy passengers through efficient interaction management. Global Airways' initial statement, a carefully worded acknowledgement that the service provided did not meet our standards, was immediately torn apart on social media as insufficient and tone-deaf. By midnight, Hawaiian time late-night talk show hosts were already incorporating the incident into their monologues. Global Airways has a new slogan, "We're not happy until you're not happy," especially in economy. In their Waikiki hotel room, Anthony and Kimberly watched the story unfold with a mix of astonishment and concern. What had begun as a personal incident had morphed into a national conversation about dignity discrimination and the increasingly separated worlds of air travel. "I didn't expect this," Kimberly admitted, watching yet another cable news segment featuring their story. "I just wanted some orange juice." Anthony put his arm around her. "It's not about the juice anymore. It's about what happens when companies forget that every passenger, regardless of what they paid, deserves basic human dignity. As they turned off the television to try to salvage some part of their first vacation night, Anthony's phone rang with a DC area code. It was his supervisor at the FAA. Reynolds, we've got the Secretary of Transportation asking for a briefing on your incident tomorrow morning. This just went federal. The Royal Hawaiian Resort. The iconic Pink Palace of the Pacific should have been the perfect beginning to their long-awaited vacation. The historic hotel on Waikiki Beach offered exactly the escape they had planned: ocean views, swaying palms, and the promise of uninterrupted relaxation. Instead, their Ocean View suite had become a makeshift command center. Anthony's FAA laptop was open on the desk, his phone constantly buzzing with updates and inquiries. Kimberly had her own calls to field colleagues from the hospital who had seen the news friends offering support, and unfortunately several journalists who had somehow obtained her number. The hotel sent up champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries, Kimberly noted, examining the elegant arrangement that had appeared at their door with a card reading, "With our compliments." "I'm not sure if it's because they recognize you from the news or if they do this for everyone." Anthony smiled tiredly. "Let's pretend it's just because we're celebrating our vacation." It was their attempt at normalcy to carve out some semblance of the getaway they had planned despite the storm swirling around them. Anthony had spent 3 hours completing his preliminary report documenting every detail of the incident with professional thoroughness. Kimberly had checked in with her hospital, assuring them she was fine and would still be taking her full 2 weeks as planned. Now, as evening fell, and the sky outside their balcony turned a spectacular shade of orange and pink, they tried to focus on each other, rather than the viral sensation they had become. "We should go down to the beach," Kimberly suggested, standing at the balcony rail. "Just walk in the sand, feel the water, remember why we came here." Anthony joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "I'd like that. Just us. No badges, no internet, no viral videos." As they made their way through the hotel lobby, they couldn't help noticing the glances, the whispers, the occasional phone raised surreptitiously to capture them. Their privacy had become collateral damage in the larger story. The beach provided some relief. With their shoes off toes in the sand and the gentle wash of waves providing natural white noise, they could almost pretend they were just another couple on vacation. "What do you think will happen?" Kimberly asked after a while, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in gold. Anthony considered the question carefully. Professionally, Global Airways will face significant penalties. Vanessa Phillips will almost certainly lose her certification. There will be a broader investigation into the airline's training and service policies. And personally, for us, he squeezed her hand. That depends on what we want. Global Airways will offer a settlement, a significant one. They'll want this to go away as quickly as possible. Kimberly stopped walking, turning to face him. "And what do we want?" It was the crucial question, one they needed to answer together before facing the corporate machinery that would soon be deployed to contain the damage they represented. "I don't want money," she said firmly. "That's not why this matters." Anthony nodded. "I feel the same way. This isn't about compensation for us. It's about fixing a broken approach." They continued walking along the shoreline, discussing what meaningful change would look like. Not just for Global Airways, but for an industry that had increasingly treated basic dignity as a premium amenity. What if Kimberly suggested her medical mind thinking in terms of structural solutions? We asked for something different. Not a payout, but a commitment to real change. Anthony considered this. Like what? Like a complete overhaul of their training. New medical emergency protocols. Independent monitoring of how they treat all passengers regardless of ticket class. A foundation. Anthony said, suddenly the idea taking shape. The Reynolds Foundation for Equitable Air Travel. Funded by Global Airways but operated independently to monitor and improve industry practices. Their conversation continued as darkness fell, the waves lapping at their feet, the stars appearing overhead. What had begun as a personal humiliation was transforming into something purposeful, a chance to create lasting change, rather than just punish a single airline or employee. When they finally returned to their room, they found more messages waiting. Global Airways CEO Robert Davidson requesting a meeting, the Department of Transportation wanting Anthony's input on potential policy revisions, a major network morning show asking for an exclusive interview. Tomorrow, Anthony decided turning off both their phones. Tonight is just for us. For a few precious hours, they reclaimed their vacation ordering room service, sharing a bottle of wine on their balcony, and remembering that before they were unwitting catalysts for industry change, they were simply Anthony and Kimberly, a couple who had been looking forward to 2 weeks of sand, sun, and each other. As they fell asleep to the sound of distant waves, they knew that the respite was temporary. Tomorrow would bring corporate representatives' settlement offers and the full weight of an airline trying to make its problem disappear. What Global Airways didn't yet understand was that Anthony and Kimberly Reynolds weren't looking for compensation. They were looking for transformation. The hibiscus room at the Royal Hawaiian had been reserved for private corporate functions, according to the discreet sign posted outside the door. Inside, the elegantly appointed conference room had been transformed into a staging ground for Global Airways' attempt to contain the damage from Flight 1207. Anthony and Kimberly arrived precisely at 10 a.m., dressed professionally but comfortably. Anthony in a tailored navy polo and khakis, Kimberly in a simple linen dress. They had deliberately chosen not to bring lawyers, a decision that clearly caught the Global Airways team off guard as they entered. On one side of the polished koa wood table sat 5 people: Robert Davidson, CEO, Jennifer Lawson, VP of Customer Experience, David Hoffman, Legal Counsel, Thomas Warren, VP of Operations, and Elizabeth Chen, Chief Communications Officer. Their side of the table was crowded with leather portfolios, tablets, and bottled water arranged with careful precision. On the other side sat just Anthony and Kimberly, hand in hand, calm and prepared. Dr. and Mr. Reynolds Davidson began rising to greet them with a practiced smile that conveyed concern without admitting fault. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us today. First and foremost, on behalf of Global Airways, I want to express our deepest apologies for your experience aboard Flight 1207. Anthony nodded acknowledgement, but didn't immediately respond. Davidson continued settling back into his chair. What happened was completely unacceptable and in no way reflects our company values or service standards. Ms. Phillips has been terminated effective immediately, and we're conducting a thorough review of the incident. Ms. Phillips is a symptom, not the cause, Kimberly stated calmly. We're more interested in discussing the company culture that encouraged her behavior. The executives exchanged glances. This was clearly not the opening they had anticipated. David Hoffman cleared his throat. Dr. Reynolds, we understand your concerns. That's why we're prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement package that we believe addresses both your personal experience and the broader issues you've raised. He slid a leather portfolio across the table. Anthony opened it, and he and Kimberly reviewed the contents together without changing expression. The offer was substantial, $750,000 in compensation, lifetime first-class status for both of them, a public apology, and a vague commitment to review service policies. This is very generous, Anthony said, after a moment closing the portfolio. But it's not what we're looking for. Davidson leaned forward. We're certainly open to discussing adjustments to the offer, if the compensation figure doesn't reflect the severity of Mr. Davidson. Kimberly interrupted gently. We don't want your money. The statement hung in the air, disrupting the familiar script of corporate settlement negotiations. I'm not sure I understand, Davidson replied, genuine confusion crossing his features. Anthony placed his hands on the table. We're not interested in financial compensation, lifetime status, or other personal benefits. What we want is meaningful, verifiable change in how Global Airways treats all passengers regardless of ticket class or appearance. He reached into his bag and produced a document of his own, sliding it across the table to Davidson. "This is our proposal." Davidson opened the folder, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as he scanned the contents. The other executives leaned in to read over his shoulder, their reactions ranging from surprise to alarm. "This is unusually comprehensive," Davidson finally said, choosing his words carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jennifer asked, looking up from the document. Kimberly took the lead. "The establishment of the Reynolds Global Airways Foundation with initial funding of $3 million. This independent foundation would develop and implement new training protocols for all Global Airways staff, focusing on medical emergency response, non-discriminatory service standards, and passenger dignity." Anthony continued. "Additionally, the elimination of all performance metrics that incentivize differential treatment based on ticket class, a complete revision of your managing resource distribution training modules, and the implementation of a third-party audit system to ensure compliance, and regular reporting of outcomes," Kimberly added. "Public transparent documentation of how these changes are being implemented and their effectiveness." The executives exchanged glances again, this time with palpable concern. This would represent a significant operational adjustment, Thomas Warren noted, his tone measured. "Some of these proposed changes touch on fundamental aspects of our service model." "Exactly," Anthony replied simply. Davidson studied them both, reassessing the situation. He had come prepared for a negotiation over money, the familiar territory of corporate settlements. Instead, he faced something far more challenging, a demand for structural reform. "May I ask," he said carefully, "why you're taking this approach rather than pursuing a traditional settlement? Most people in your position would take the money and go away." Kimberly finished for him. "Mr. Davidson, I'm a doctor. Anthony is a federal safety inspector. We both chose careers dedicated to protecting people. What happened on that flight wasn't just about us. It was about a pattern of behavior that puts passengers at risk and strips them of their dignity based on the price of their ticket. We've received hundreds of messages since the incident," Anthony added, "from your own passengers, your former employees, even your current staff. This isn't an isolated issue, and it won't be solved by firing one flight attendant or paying us to be quiet." Davidson sat back, considering their words. For the first time, the practiced corporate mask slipped slightly, revealing a man confronting a genuine challenge to his leadership and his company's culture. $3 million is a significant commitment, he noted. "Less than the FAA fines you're likely facing," Anthony countered. "Less than the lawsuit damages you could incur. Certainly less than the stock value you've already lost since the videos went viral." Hoffman whispered something to Davidson, who nodded slightly. "We would need time to review this proposal in detail," Davidson said finally. "Some aspects may require board approval." "Of course," Anthony agreed. "You have 48 hours. Davidson's eyebrows rose. "That's a very tight time frame for changes of this magnitude." "It is," Kimberly acknowledged. "But every day that passes without action is another day your staff operates under the same policies that led to what happened on Flight 12007. As the meeting concluded and handshakes were exchanged, the power dynamic had been fundamentally altered. The executives gathered their materials, their body language revealing the unexpected challenge they now faced. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with money and confidentiality agreements. This was a demand for authentic transformation. In the elevator riding down from the meeting, Jennifer turned to Davidson. They never once mentioned the videos or media coverage. They didn't have to, he replied quietly. That's what makes them dangerous. They don't want publicity or money. They want actual change. Back in their room, Anthony and Kimberly waited for the corporate machinery to process their proposal. "Do you think they'll agree?" Kimberly asked, looking out at the beach they had still barely experienced. Anthony stood beside her. "They don't have much choice. The alternative is a public relations nightmare that keeps getting worse: federal penalties and possibly a class action lawsuit, now that others are coming forward. And if they refuse, then we go public with everything we've gathered: the training materials, the employee testimonials, the performance metrics that reward exactly the kind of behavior we experienced. He smiled slightly. But my guess, they'll agree to most of it. And then, Anthony said, putting his arm around her, we finally start our vacation. 46 hours after presenting their proposal to Global Airways, Anthony and Kimberly received a call from Robert Davidson's office. The executive team was ready to meet again. This time, the meeting took place in a larger conference room at Global Airways' Honolulu Operations Center. The atmosphere was markedly different from the intimate setting of the Royal Hawaiian. This was corporate territory designed to project power and authority, with its gleaming table floor-to-ceiling views of the tarmac and company logo prominently displayed. The executive team had expanded as well. Alongside Davidson, Lawson, Hoffman, Warren, and Chen sat three new faces: the chief financial officer, the director of training, and a woman introduced as Dr. Sarah Patel, a newly engaged consultant specializing in organizational culture change. Anthony and Kimberly noted the additions with interest. The presence of the CFO suggested financial decisions would be made. The training director and cultural consultant indicated Global Airways was at least seriously considering their proposal. "Thank you for joining us." Davidson began, his tone more businesslike than the carefully cultivated warmth of their previous meeting. "We've reviewed your proposal extensively over the past 2 days. I've also briefed our board of directors on both the incident and your suggested response." He paused, clearly choosing his next words carefully. "The Reynolds Foundation proposal represents a significant departure from standard incident resolution. However, given the circumstances and the broader implications of what occurred on Flight 1207, we've come to the conclusion that extraordinary measures are appropriate." Jennifer Lawson picked up the thread. "We're prepared to establish the Reynolds Foundation for Passenger Dignity, with initial funding of $2.5 million to be distributed over 3 years. The full $3 million provided immediately," Anthony countered without hesitation. A brief silence fell over the room before Davidson nodded. "Acceptable. The foundation would operate with independent oversight," Kimberly continued, "with a board comprised of industry experts, passenger advocates, and medical professionals. Global Airways would have representation, but not controlling interest." "We can agree to that structure," Davidson replied, "provided Global Airways maintains some input on initiatives that directly impact operational procedures." "Input, yes. Veto power, no," Anthony clarified. Davidson nodded again, the negotiation proceeding with remarkable efficiency now that both sides understood the parameters. Regarding the elimination of performance metrics tied to class-based service differentials, Thomas Warren interjected, "We've conducted a preliminary review of our evaluation systems. While we maintain that some service differentiation between cabin classes is both appropriate and expected by our premium customers, we acknowledge that certain metrics may have created unintended incentives. The Managing Resource Distribution training module will be discontinued effective immediately," added the Director of Training. "We're already developing replacement materials that emphasize consistent safety and dignity standards across all cabin classes while maintaining appropriate service differentials." Kimberly leaned forward. "Who will develop these new materials?" "That's where we see the Reynolds Foundation playing a critical role," Jennifer explained. "Dr. Patel has extensive experience in organizational psychology and ethical service delivery. She would work directly with the foundation to create training that balances business needs with passenger dignity." Dr. Patel spoke for the first time. "If I may, Dr. Reynolds, my preliminary assessment suggests that Global Airways' current training emphasizes hierarchical service to an extent that indeed may encourage discriminatory behavior. This isn't unique to Global, it's industry-wide, but it can and should be addressed through evidence-based training reforms." Anthony studied her with measured interest. And you believe Global Airways is genuinely committed to this reform, not just as a public relations exercise. I wouldn't have accepted the engagement otherwise, Dr. Patel replied evenly. My reputation is built on actual outcomes, not corporate window dressing. Davidson cleared his throat. We're also prepared to implement the third-party audit system you proposed. Quarterly reviews of passenger experience metrics, complaint patterns, and staff performance with published results available to the public, with disaggregated data showing outcomes by passenger demographics and ticket class, Anthony specified. Yes, Davidson agreed, though his slight hesitation revealed the discomfort such transparency would create. For the next 2 hours, they worked through the details of the proposal implementation timelines. Foundation, governance, training, development, accountability measures. The discussion was methodical, occasionally tense, but remarkably productive. By the end, they had reached agreement on a comprehensive transformation package. Establishment of the Reynolds Foundation for Passenger Dignity, with $3 million initial funding. Complete overhaul of flight attendant training, emphasizing medical response protocols and consistent dignity standards. Elimination of performance metrics that incentivized class-based discrimination. Implementation of quarterly third-party audits with public reporting. Revision of all service policies to ensure medical needs were prioritized, regardless of ticket class. Creation of an anonymous reporting system for both passengers and employees to flag dignity concerns. Development of specific protocols for passengers with medical conditions. As the meeting concluded, Davidson offered a final thought. There's one additional element we'd like to propose. Global Airways would like to offer positions on our Customer Experience Advisory Board to both of you with quarterly meetings and appropriate compensation. Anthony and Kimberly exchanged glances. We appreciate the offer, Anthony replied, but we believe our involvement should remain at the foundation level. The advisory board should include diverse voices from your actual regular passengers. Davidson nodded, accepting the redirection. Of course, we'll revise that approach. As hands were shaken and the formal agreement was prepared for signatures, Elizabeth Chen, the chief communications officer, raised the question they had all been avoiding. About the public narrative, she began carefully. How would you like to handle the announcement of the foundation? A joint statement would provide a positive resolution story for the media. Anthony considered this. A joint statement is acceptable provided it clearly acknowledges what happened and outlines specific commitments, not just general promises to do better. And no non-disclosure requirements, Kimberly added firmly. We retain the right to speak about our experience and the Foundation's work. Chen looked like she wanted to object, but was silenced by a subtle shake of Davidson's head. Agreed, he said. Transparency is part of our commitment going forward. As Anthony and Kimberly left the corporate headquarters, they felt a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. What had begun as a humiliating incident had transformed into a potential catalyst for genuine change, not just at Global Airways, but potentially across the industry. Do you think they'll follow through? Kimberly asked as they walked to their rental car. Anthony looked back at the gleaming corporate building. I think Davidson is smart enough to know this is his best option, both for damage control and for actually improving his airline. Whether the culture truly changes, that will take more than signatures on an agreement. Well, Kimberly said, squeezing his hand, that's why we insisted on independent oversight and public reporting. As they drove back toward Waikiki, both were thinking the same thing now. Perhaps their vacation could finally begin. While Anthony and Kimberly focused on establishing the foundation, the regulatory machinery of the Federal Aviation Administration was already in full motion. Anthony's initial report had triggered a cascade of investigative actions that quickly expanded beyond Flight 1207. In the FAA's Western Pacific Regional Office, a team of investigators led by Regional Director Elaine Nichols had assembled to review not just the single incident, but Global Airways' broader patterns of service and compliance. Reynolds' preliminary report raises significant concerns about potential structural issues Nichols explained to her team during their initial briefing. This isn't just about one flight attendant's behavior. We need to determine whether Global Airways has patterns of non-compliance with accessibility regulations, medical response protocols, and anti-discrimination requirements. The investigation quickly uncovered troubling patterns. Passenger complaint data revealed that Global Airways had received 347 formal complaints regarding disability accommodation over the past 18 months, significantly higher than industry averages. More concerning, their internal categorization system had classified many of these as passenger misunderstanding of service levels rather than potential regulatory violations. When investigators obtained internal emails through formal information requests, they discovered multiple discussions among middle management about containment strategies for passenger complaints, including specific language to avoid triggering FAA reporting requirements. One particularly damaging email from a regional service director stated, "Remember that accommodation requests from premium cabins should be categorized as service enhancements, while similar requests from economy should be evaluated against basic service standards to maintain appropriate resource allocation." The investigation expanded further when Lisa Garcia and 3 other flight attendants came forward with additional documentation. They provided screenshots of the airline's internal messaging system showing discussions about high-maintenance passengers and strategies to manage them, language that often correlated with economy travelers who requested accommodations for disabilities or medical needs. Most concerning was the discovery of an internal performance tracking system called Service Efficiency Metrics that explicitly rewarded cabin crew who minimized time spent addressing passenger requests in economy cabins while maintaining extended interaction times in premium cabins. As the evidence mounted, the FAA expanded its investigation to include Global Airways training programs, service manuals, and internal compliance monitoring. What they found suggested a corporate culture that had gradually normalized practices that potentially violated federal regulations regarding equal treatment and accommodation. 2 weeks after the Flight 1207 incident, Director Nichols called Anthony while he was finally enjoying some beach time with Kimberly. Reynolds: "Sorry to interrupt your vacation, but I thought you'd want to know. We're expanding the investigation to include all of Global's domestic operations. The patterns we're seeing suggest this goes well beyond one flight or one crew member." Anthony listened as she outlined their preliminary findings, including potential violations that could result in significant fines. "We're looking at a minimum of $2.2 million in civil penalties based on what we've documented so far," Nichols explained. "And that's before we consider whether to recommend certificate action." Certificate action, the regulatory process that could restrict Global Airways' operating authority, was the nuclear option of FAA enforcement rarely threatened and even more rarely implemented. That it was even being mentioned reflected the seriousness of what the investigation had uncovered. "The Secretary of Transportation is personally interested in this case," Nichols added. "There's a feeling that this may highlight industry-wide issues that require broader regulatory attention." After ending the call, Anthony shared the update with Kimberly as they walked along the shore. "It sounds like the foundation may be just the beginning," she observed. "If the FAA is considering industry-wide implications, this could lead to new regulations." Anthony nodded. "The airline industry has been pushing boundaries on service stratification for years. Maybe this is the wake-up call they needed." Meanwhile, the investigation continued to expand. Other airlines began internal reviews of their own training and service policies, anxious to avoid becoming the next Global Airways. Industry publications ran features examining the class divide in the skies and questioning whether airlines had gone too far in differentiating service based on fare class. Consumer advocacy groups seized the moment to push for stronger passenger protections, citing the Flight 1207 incident as evidence that industry self-regulation was insufficient. congressional representatives with transportation oversight responsibilities began calling for hearings on disability accommodation in commercial aviation. What had begun as one passenger being denied orange juice had catalyzed a much broader examination of how airlines treated their customers and whether that treatment complied with both the letter and spirit of federal regulations. For Anthony, watching this unfold from the relative peace of his delayed vacation, there was a certain professional satisfaction. The regulatory system he had dedicated his career to was working as intended, identifying violations, holding companies accountable, and driving industry-wide improvements in safety and service. For Kimberly, the physician whose denied medical need had triggered this chain of events, the expanding investigation validated what she had long observed in healthcare. Individual incidents often reflected deeper institutional issues that required structural solutions. Together, they recognized that their individual experience had become something larger, a catalyst for examining whether dignity should be determined by the price of a plane ticket. In the executive boardroom of Global Airways headquarters in Atlanta, Robert Davidson faced the most significant crisis of his CEO tenure. The gleaming table around which his leadership team gathered had witnessed many difficult decisions over the years, but none quite like this. "The numbers are clear," explained CFO Michael Wilson, gesturing toward the spreadsheet displayed on the room's main screen. "We have three options: fight the FAA findings and the Reynolds Foundation requirements, implement partial reforms while negotiating reduced penalties, or embrace comprehensive change." The data painted a stark picture. Global Airways stock had dropped 12% since the Flight 1207 incident. Advance bookings were down 8%. Social media sentiment analysis showed a 64% negative rating, unprecedented for the airline that had previously enjoyed mid-tier reputation rankings. Fighting would be costly and protracted, advised David Hoffman, legal counsel. Based on the evidence the FAA has already gathered, we would likely lose any administrative challenge. That path would extend the negative publicity cycle and potentially increase penalties. "What about a middle path?" asked Jennifer Lawson. "We've already agreed to the Reynolds Foundation. Could we implement those changes while pushing back on some of the broader FAA findings?" Thomas Warren shook his head. "The problem is optics. Any resistance now looks like we're admitting to the foundation requirements because we were caught while still trying to minimize other issues. It undermines the authenticity of our response." Davidson had remained silent throughout the discussion, his fingers steepled before him. Now he looked up, his decision made. "We're going all in on reform," he stated, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Not because we have to, but because it's the right thing to do." The executives exchanged surprised glances. Davidson had built his career as a pragmatic, numbers-focused leader. This sounded almost idealistic. "Robert began, the CFO, cautiously full compliance and restructuring of our service model will impact quarterly earnings significantly. The board will adapt." Davidson interrupted. "I've already spoken with the chair. She agrees that our long-term viability requires more than superficial changes." He stood, moving to the window overlooking the tarmac where dozens of aircraft bore the Global Airways livery. "We built this airline on the premise that different passengers want different experiences and are willing to pay accordingly. That remains true. But somewhere along the way, we crossed a line from service differentiation to treating economy passengers as less deserving of basic dignity and safety." Turning back to face his team, Davidson continued, "I've been reviewing the training materials that were leaked, the performance metrics our own people developed, the internal communications about managing economy passengers. It's not who we should be." The room remained silent as Davidson outlined his vision for moving forward, accepting the full $2.2 million FAA fine without contest, implementing all Reynolds Foundation initiatives ahead of schedule, conducting a comprehensive audit of all customer-facing policies, and training and restructuring executive compensation to tie bonuses to dignity metrics across all cabin classes. "This is going to be painful," he acknowledged. "Some shareholders will object. Some executives may leave. But when we come through this, Global Airways will set the standard for how an airline can offer differentiated service without sacrificing universal dignity." As the meeting concluded, Davidson added a final directive. "I want to speak directly with Inspector Reynolds and Dr. Reynolds. Not about negotiations, those are complete. I want to thank them personally for forcing us to confront issues we should have addressed long ago." Later that day, the corporate decision was announced both internally and publicly. Global Airways would accept all FAA findings, pay all penalties without appeal, and embark on what Davidson characterized as the most comprehensive service culture transformation in commercial aviation history. Industry analysts were divided on whether this represented a visionary pivot or a desperate attempt to salvage a damaged brand. Employees received the announcement with reactions ranging from relief to skepticism to concern about what the changes would mean for their daily work. For Vanessa Phillips, watching the announcement on her television at home, the corporate mea culpa came too late. Her aviation career was over, her professional identity shattered. The realization that she had been operating exactly as her training and metrics had encouraged offered cold comfort as she faced an uncertain future. For Tyler Wright, demoted from gate agent to baggage handling, the announcement prompted a moment of personal reflection. Had he truly believed in the class-based treatment he'd enforced, or had he simply been following a culture he'd never thought to question? As Global Airways embarked on its corporate transformation, these individual reckonings multiplied across the organization. Employees at every level confronting their role in a system that had prioritized hierarchy over humanity. The decision point had passed. Now came the harder part, turning corporate commitments into meaningful change. 6 weeks after the Flight 1207 incident, a group of 30 Global Airways flight attendants gathered in a modern training facility near Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The room buzzed with uncertain energy. These experienced crew members had been selected as the first cohort for what the company was calling dignity-centered service training. At the front of the room stood Dr. Kimberly Reynolds and James Rodriguez, an unlikely partnership that symbolized the transformation underway. Behind them, a screen displayed the Reynolds Foundation logo alongside Global Airways, a visual representation of the collaboration that had emerged from confrontation. "I never expected to be here," Kimberly began candidly. 6 weeks ago, I was just a passenger trying to manage my diabetes during a flight to Hawaii." Her opening immediately distinguished this training from the corporate programs these flight attendants had experienced throughout their careers. There was no corporate jargon, no carefully scripted positivity, just authentic human connection. "The purpose of this training isn't to make you feel bad about past practices or to eliminate service differences between cabin classes," she continued. "It's to ensure that safety, dignity, and medical needs are prioritized equally for every passenger, regardless of their ticket price." James stepped forward. "I've been flying with Global for 20 years. I've seen our service culture evolve, not always for the better. This training was developed with input from active crew members like me who want to be proud of how we treat every passenger." What unfolded over the next 3 days represented a radical departure from traditional airline training. Instead of focusing on service procedures and brand standards, the program centered on human experience and medical responsiveness. On the first day, flight attendants participated in simulation exercises, where they experienced what passengers with various medical conditions might face during air travel. Using continuous glucose monitors similar to Kimberly's, they felt firsthand the urgent need for quick sugar during hypoglycemic episodes. They navigated aircraft cabins while simulating mobility impairments, vision limitations, and anxiety disorders. The point isn't to make you medical experts, Kimberly explained. It's to help you recognize that when a passenger expresses a medical need, they're not trying to get special treatment. They're trying to stay safe and well. Lisa Garcia, now working directly with the Reynolds Foundation, led a particularly powerful session on unconscious bias in service delivery. Using actual footage from Global Airways flights with passengers blurred for privacy, she demonstrated how subtle differences in language attention and responsiveness manifested across cabin classes. I never realized how often I said, "No, sorry" to economy passengers and "Let me see what I can do" to first class, for essentially the same request, admitted one veteran flight attendant during the discussion. The second day focused on revised emergency response protocols. Dr. Harold Wilson, the cardiologist who had offered assistance on Flight 1207, joined as a guest presenter, walking the crew through common in-flight medical emergencies and appropriate responses. Most revolutionary was the dignity dialogue portion of the training, where passengers from diverse backgrounds, including those with disabilities, medical conditions, and varied economic means, spoke directly to the flight attendants about their experiences in air travel. "I saved for months to visit my grandchildren," shared an elderly woman using a walker. "The way flight attendants speak to me shouldn't depend on whether I could afford main cabin or basic economy." A father of a child with autism described the anxiety of managing his son's needs while feeling rushed by impatient cabin crew. A business executive in a wheelchair detailed the indignity of having his requests ignored until fellow passengers intervened on his behalf. These first-hand accounts transformed abstract concepts into human realities, bridging the gap between policy and impact in ways that traditional training never achieved. The final day introduced the newly developed service framework, Universal Dignity with Differentiated Service. The model explicitly separated human dignity to be maintained equally for all passengers from service enhancements, which could appropriately vary by fare class. First-class passengers absolutely should receive premium meals, more attentive service, and additional amenities, James explained. That's what they paid for. But every passenger, regardless of ticket type, deserves respectful communication, medical responsiveness, and basic human dignity. As part of this framework, Global Airways had eliminated performance metrics tied to accommodation avoidance and introduced new measures focusing on medical response times, accommodation, fulfillment rates, and passenger dignity surveys across all cabin classes. The training concluded with a powerful symbolic gesture. Each flight attendant received 2 pins to wear on their uniform, their traditional Global Airways wings, and a new Reynolds Foundation emblem representing their commitment to dignity-centered service. "These wings represent your professional status," Kimberly told them. "This emblem represents your human commitment. Both matter equally." As the first cohort completed their training, the impact was immediately apparent. Many expressed profound shifts in their understanding of their role. "I've always taken pride in providing excellent service to our premium passengers," reflected one senior flight attendant. "Now I understand that dignity isn't a premium amenity. It's the baseline everyone deserves." This initial group would become dignity ambassadors, helping to train their colleagues as the program rolled out across Global Airways' entire workforce of over 14,000 flight attendants. The training was also being adapted for gate agents, customer service representatives, and even pilots, transforming Global's entire approach to passenger interaction. What made this training revolution particularly significant was its transparency. The Reynolds Foundation published detailed curricula outcomes measurements and participant feedback, creating an industry resource that other airlines could adapt and implement. The training that emerged from one denied request for orange juice was gradually becoming the blueprint for a broader industry transformation. 9 months after Flight 1207, the annual Airline Industry Conference in Dallas devoted its opening day to a topic that would have been unthinkable a year earlier: economic stratification versus universal dignity, finding the balance in modern air travel. The ballroom was packed with airline executives, regulatory officials, industry analysts, and media representatives. On stage sat an unlikely panel Robert Davidson, CEO of Global Airways, Anthony Reynolds, now serving as the FAA's Special Advisor on Passenger Dignity Standards, Dr. Sarah Patel, Organizational Psychologist, James Rodriguez, representing Flight Crew Perspectives, and Rachel Torres, whose viral videos had catalyzed the industry conversation. When we began implementing the Reynolds Foundation initiatives, Davidson explained to the audience, we expected significant costs and operational challenges. What we didn't expect was that our passenger satisfaction scores would improve across all cabin classes, including first and business. He displayed a graph showing Global Airways' customer satisfaction metrics over the past 6 months, a steady upward trend that defied industry skepticism about the reforms. It turns out, Davidson continued that even our premium passengers don't enjoy witnessing others being treated poorly. The atmosphere throughout the aircraft improves when every passenger feels respected. Anthony shared preliminary findings from the FAA's expanded review of industry practices. What we discovered at Global Airways wasn't unique. It was simply where the underlying issues became most visible. Our industry-wide analysis found concerning patterns across multiple carriers' service policies that potentially violated disability accommodation requirements, medical response protocols that varied by cabin class, and training that implicitly encouraged differential treatment beyond appropriate service distinctions. Dr. Patel presented research on how subtle environmental cues from boarding processes to cabin crew language reinforced status hierarchies that undermined passenger well-being and crew job satisfaction. The aviation industry has gradually normalized extreme stratification, she explained. First-class passengers now board through separate jetways, use different lounges, receive different safety briefings, and in some cases are even directed to use different lavatories than economy passengers. The psychological impact of these divisions extends beyond customer experience to fundamental questions of human dignity. James Rodriguez offered the crew perspective. Most flight attendants enter this profession because they care about people's safety and comfort. The metrics and culture pushed us toward treating passengers differently based on ticket class, often against our better instincts. The new approach has actually increased job satisfaction because it aligns better with why many of us chose this career. Rachel Torres provided the passenger advocate viewpoint, sharing how her social media channels had become a platform for travelers to document both negative experiences and positive changes. What passengers are telling us is simple, differentiated service is expected and accepted. Differentiated dignity is not. The impact of Flight 1207 had extended far beyond Global Airways. In the months following the incident and subsequent FAA investigation, 3 other major airlines had voluntarily adopted similar dignity-centered training programs, working directly with the Reynolds Foundation. The Department of Transportation had issued new guidance on medical accommodation requirements, explicitly stating that response protocols must be consistent regardless of fare class. Consumer advocacy groups had developed a dignity index ranking airlines on their treatment of economy passengers. The Association of Flight Attendants had established new professional standards emphasizing universal respect across cabin classes. Industry publications had shifted their coverage to include dignity metrics alongside traditional service ratings. Most significantly, congressional hearings on passenger rights had led to proposed legislation, the Air Travel Dignity Act, that would codify many of the voluntary reforms into federal regulation. As the panel discussion concluded, an airline CEO in the audience asked the question on many executives' minds. Aren't we overreacting to one incident? The vast majority of flights operate without any issues. Kimberly Reynolds, seated in the front row, requested the microphone. That one incident revealed patterns that affected countless passengers who didn't have viral videos or FAA inspectors to advocate for them. Before Flight 1207, I was just one of those passengers, a doctor who nearly experienced a medical emergency because my economy seat was deemed less deserving of a full can of juice. She paused, making eye contact with airline executives throughout the room. The question isn't whether most flights operate without incident. The question is whether your business model requires some passengers to be treated with less dignity than others. Her words hung in the air as the session concluded, challenging industry leaders to confront the core issue that Flight 1207 had exposed in the pursuit of premium revenue. Had airlines lost sight of the humanity of all their passengers? The transformation that began with a denied request for orange juice was gradually reshaping one of the world's largest industries, not by eliminating service differences, but by establishing dignity as a universal right rather than a premium amenity. The small apartment in East Point, Georgia, bore little resemblance to the life Vanessa Phillips had imagined for herself. After 15 years with Global Airways, rising from junior flight attendant to purser on international routes, she had expected to be approaching the peak of her career, perhaps moving into training or management. Instead, at 43, she sat alone at a small kitchen table, scrolling through job listings that seemed worlds away from the globe-trotting career she had lost. Customer service representative, retail sales associate, call center operator. Each possibility represented a step backward, a diminishment of the identity she had built. On her laptop screen, a news article about Global Airways' industry-leading dignity training featured a photo of Kimberly and Anthony Reynolds alongside Robert Davidson. The article praised the airline's transformative response to the Flight 1207 incident. Vanessa closed the browser window, unable to bear seeing her former employer celebrated for reforms catalyzed by her downfall. The morning after the incident, she had been summarily terminated. Her security credentials deactivated, her company email shut down. Her 15 years of service reduced to a brief dismissal letter citing violation of company policies and federal regulations. What had followed was worse. Her name and face plastered across social media and news sites labeled as the budget ticket flight attendant who had denied medical care to a diabetic passenger. The Federal Aviation Administration had revoked her flight attendant certification following their investigation, effectively ending any possibility of working for another airline. The cruelest irony was that she had been doing exactly what her training and performance metrics had encouraged. Global Airways had cultivated a culture that prized efficiency in economy service and attentiveness in premium cabins, then sacrificed her when that culture was exposed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Garcia, her former trainee. "Thought you might want to know they're completely restructuring the training program. Everything we were taught about managing economy passengers is gone." Vanessa didn't reply. Her relationship with Lisa had fractured after learning that the younger flight attendant had provided internal training materials to investigators. Lisa had apologized, explained that she felt compelled to tell the truth, but the betrayal still stung. Rising from the table, Vanessa moved to the window overlooking the apartment complex parking lot. From her third-floor unit, she could see the flight path to Hartsfield-Jackson International. Every few minutes, a plane passed overhead, a reminder of the career and identity she had lost. The hardest part wasn't the professional consequences, though those were devastating. It was confronting who she had become during her years at Global Airways. Watching the viral videos of herself, seeing the dismissive tone, the contemptuous expression, the casual cruelty toward a passenger in medical distress had forced a reckoning she couldn't escape. When had she transformed from an eager young flight attendant committed to passenger safety into someone who would deny juice to a diabetic passenger? When had economy passengers become budget travelers in her mind, less deserving of care and dignity? On her refrigerator, held by a magnet, was a photo from her first year at Global Airways. Her 28-year-old self smiled proudly in her new uniform, eyes bright with possibility. That woman had joined the airline because she loved helping people navigate the stress and excitement of travel. That woman would have been horrified by the behavior displayed on Flight 1207. Somewhere along the way, through years of corporate metrics that rewarded certain behaviors, through a culture that normalized class-based treatment, through the daily reinforcement of passenger hierarchy, that woman had disappeared. Now, in the aftermath of her very public disgrace, Vanessa faced the challenge of rediscovering her humanity while rebuilding a life from the ashes of her former career. The irony wasn't lost on her as Global Airways embraced a new commitment to universal dignity. She was learning the hard way that dignity wasn't a commodity to be allocated based on ticket price. It was a fundamental human need that, once stripped away, left profound damage in its wake. Tomorrow, she would interview for a customer service position at a car rental agency at the airport. It wasn't the globe-trotting career she had lost, but perhaps it offered something more valuable, a chance to remember what genuine service looked like untethered from the twisted metrics and hierarchies that had warped her perspective over 15 years in the air. As another plane passed overhead, Vanessa made a silent promise to herself, whatever came next, she would never again allow any system or culture to override her basic humanity. Some lessons came at a devastatingly high price, but they were no less valuable for their cost. Breathe. Lisa Garcia reminded herself, straightening her freshly pressed Global Airways uniform in the crew lounge mirror. Just breathe. Today marked her return to active flight duty after 3 months working with the Reynolds Foundation on training development. At 24, she had never expected to become central to the biggest transformation in her airline's history. Yet here she was, one of the first Dignity ambassadors rejoining regular flight operations. Her new assignment was particularly meaningful. She would be working alongside James Rodriguez, the veteran flight attendant, who had modeled proper behavior during the Flight 1207 incident. Together, they would help implement the new service approach while supporting their colleagues through the transition. Nervous James asked, appearing behind her in the mirror. Lisa nodded. Everyone knows I was on that flight, that I was shadowing Vanessa, that I testified. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing. That took courage. It didn't feel like courage, Lisa admitted. It felt like finally being honest about something I knew was wrong all along. In the months since Flight 1207, Lisa had undergone her own transformation. Initially paralyzed by guilt over her passive role in the incident, she had found purpose in helping develop the new training programs. Working directly with Dr. Kimberly Reynolds, she had channeled her remorse into constructive action, ensuring that future flight attendants wouldn't absorb the toxic lessons she had been taught. The crew briefing room was buzzing with activity as Lisa and James entered. Some of her colleagues greeted her warmly. Others were more reserved, still processing their feelings about the company-wide changes her testimony had helped prompt. Today's flight is special, James announced to the assembled crew. We'll be implementing the full dignity-centered service approach for the first time on a commercial flight with regular passengers. He outlined the key differences. They would demonstrate medical needs addressed with equal urgency regardless of cabin-class communication that maintained respectful language throughout the aircraft, accommodation requests treated as legitimate regardless of ticket price. This doesn't mean first class doesn't get premium service, he clarified. They absolutely do. It means every passenger receives the same level of basic respect and dignity. As the briefing concluded, Lisa felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Captain Michael Thompson, the same pilot who had been in command of Flight 1207, Miss Garcia, he said quietly. I wanted to thank you. Lisa blinked in surprise. Thank me? For what? For having the courage to speak up. What happened on that flight? It wasn't just about one crew member. It was about a culture we all participated in. Your testimony helped change that culture. His acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to Lisa's eyes. In the chaos following the incident, she had focused on her own failure to intervene, rarely considering that her subsequent actions might be viewed as courageous rather than merely necessary. Boarding began 30 minutes later. As passengers streamed onto the aircraft, Lisa greeted each one with the same warm welcome, whether they turned left toward first class or right toward economy. The subtle shift was noticeable even to herself. She was seeing passengers as people first, ticket holders second. Midway through the flight, Lisa assisted an elderly woman in economy who needed help accessing her medication. As she knelt in the aisle ensuring the passenger could open her pill container, She felt a profound sense of professional pride, the kind that came from genuine service rather than adherence to arbitrary hierarchies. "Thank you, dear," the woman said, patting Lisa's hand. "You're very kind." "It's my pleasure," Lisa replied, meaning it sincerely. Later, during a quiet moment in the galley, James nodded approvingly. "You're a natural at this, you know. The real this, not what they taught before." "I wrote to Vanessa," Lisa confessed suddenly. "I wanted her to know that I understand she was following the same training and metrics we all were, that what happened wasn't just about her." "Did she respond?" Lisa shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe she never will. I just needed her to know." As the flight progressed, Lisa moved through the cabin with a growing sense of liberation. Without the pressure to minimize service in economy while performing elaborate rituals in premium cabins, she found herself connecting more authentically with all passengers and enjoying her job more deeply as a result. The transformation wasn't just procedural, it was personal. The same Lisa Garcia who had once watched silently as a diabetic passenger was denied juice was now an advocate for a new approach to air travel, one that balanced business realities with basic humanity. As they prepared for landing, a passenger in economy stopped her with a light touch on her arm. "Excuse me," the woman said, "but weren't you on that flight? The one with the FAA Inspector?" Lisa tensed momentarily before nodding. "Yes, I was. I just wanted to say thank you," the woman continued. "My daughter is diabetic. Watching how things have changed because of that incident, it matters to families like mine." This unexpected moment of gratitude carried Lisa through the landing and deplaning process. As passengers exited, many thanking her with genuine warmth, she realized that redemption wasn't a destination, but a process, one that continued with each interaction, each flight, each opportunity to honor the dignity of others. The Lisa Garcia, who had once absorbed Vanessa Phillips' approach to passenger stratification, was gone. In her place stood a young woman who had found her professional voice and moral compass, not despite the Flight 1207 incident, but because of it. As the aircraft emptied and the crew prepared for turnaround, Lisa touched the Reynolds Foundation pin on her uniform. It wasn't just a symbol of corporate change. It was a personal reminder that redemption was possible, that mistakes could lead to growth, and that speaking truth, however difficult, was always the first step towards something better. The roar of jet engines and the clatter of baggage carts created a constant industrial symphony on the tarmac of Los Angeles International Airport. Amid the noise and exhaust, Tyler Wright heaved another suitcase onto the conveyor belt leading into the aircraft's belly. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cool morning temperature, the physical labor of baggage handling a stark contrast to his former position behind the gate podium. "Right. We need more hands at gate 34B. Oversized baggage called his supervisor over the radio. Copy that, Tyler responded, wiping his brow with his uniform sleeve. At 29, Tyler had imagined a very different trajectory for his career. After 3 years as a gate agent, he had been on track for a supervisor position, a step toward eventual management. Instead, he found himself demoted to the ramp following his role in the Flight 1207 incident. The official reason cited was failure to follow accommodation protocols and unprofessional customer interaction. But Tyler knew the truth was more damning the smirk he had shared with Vanessa. The malicious pleasure he had taken in telling the Reynolds couple they could wait until Thursday for another flight, the casual cruelty he had displayed on camera. Unlike Vanessa, he hadn't lost his job entirely. Global Airways had determined that his actions, while inappropriate, didn't warrant termination. Instead, they had reassigned him to a non-customer-facing role, loading the very aircraft he had once proudly controlled access to. The irony wasn't lost on him. Now he handled everyone's baggage with the same attention. First class, business economy, basic, all went into the same hold, treated with identical care. The luggage didn't come with visible markers of passenger status, just tags indicating destination and priority. In the belly of the plane, the carefully maintained class hierarchies of the cabin dissolved into simple logistics. During his break, Tyler sat in the staff room, scrolling through his phone. A Global Airways press release announced the successful implementation of their new Universal Dignity service approach. Employee testimonials praised the positive changes in company culture. Passenger feedback showed improved satisfaction across all cabin classes. He couldn't help but wonder, would he have behaved differently if these changes had been in place 9 months ago? Or had his actions revealed something fundamental about his character that no corporate policy could have modified? The uncomfortable truth was that he had enjoyed the power of the gate podium, the ability to upgrade some passengers while enforcing rigid rules for others. He had absorbed the unspoken company culture that valued certain travelers over others, not just in service amenities, but in basic human respect. Heading back out announced Diego Ramirez, another ramp worker finishing his break. "You coming?" "Right." Tyler nodded, pocketing his phone. Diego had been on the ramp for 15 years, maintaining a cheerful attitude, despite the physical demands and often thankless nature of the job. In the 3 months since Tyler's demotion, Diego had become an unexpected mentor. Still moping about the gate job, Diego asked as they walked toward their next assignment. "Just thinking," Tyler replied. "You know, Diego said I had a chance at a gate position years ago. Turned it down." Tyler looked at him in surprise. "Why would you do that?" Diego shrugged. "Watched what it did to people. All that power over who gets on, who gets upgraded, who has to wait. Seemed to bring out something ugly." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Down here, Diego continued gesturing to the tarmac. "We're all the same. Just getting people's stuff where it needs to go. Honest work." As they approached the aircraft, Tyler spotted a familiar face through the window. James Rodriguez, the flight attendant who had attempted to help Dr. Reynolds on Flight 1207. James was now leading the implementation of the new service approach. His long-held values finally aligned with company policy. Tyler had avoided eye contact with any crew from that flight, ashamed of his role in the incident. But today, unexpectedly, James noticed him on the tarmac and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of a shared experience. That evening after his shift ended, Tyler sat in his car in the employee parking lot. The setting sun cast long shadows across the terminals as aircraft departed for destinations across the globe. 9 months ago, he had been part of the system that determined who enjoyed those journeys in comfort and who endured them in cramped discomfort. A small but significant gatekeeper in the elaborate hierarchy of air travel. His demotion had been public humiliating and initially perceived as deeply unfair. But something unexpected had happened during his months on the ramp, a slow recalibration of values, a gradual recognition that the power he had wielded at the gate had corrupted something essential in his character. Tyler started his car, catching his reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at him was weathered from outdoor work, humbled by consequences, but perhaps more honest than the polished, smirking gate agent who had taken pleasure in other people's disappointment. He wouldn't be on the ramp forever. Global Airways' new policies included pathways for employees to earn back customer-facing positions through training and demonstrated commitment to the company's revised values. But if he returned to a position of passenger interaction, he would bring with him the perspective gained from months of loading everyone's belongings with equal care regardless of ticket price or status. Some lessons came at a high professional cost. But as Tyler drove home through the Los Angeles traffic, he considered that perhaps the cost had been necessary not just for Global Airways or the Reynolds family, but for his own humanity. Anthony and Kimberly Reynolds stood quietly at Gate 42B in Terminal 4 of Los Angeles International Airport exactly 1 year after they had first attempted to board their Hawaiian vacation flight. They weren't traveling today. They had come specifically to observe. "It looks different somehow," Kimberly noted, watching the boarding process for Global Airways Flight 1207, the same flight number, the same destination, but a transformed experience. Anthony nodded. "Look at the gate displays. Where once there had been separate boarding lanes clearly delineated by status first-class elite members, premium economy, and the subtly disdained everyone else, now stood a more streamlined process. Priority boarding remained for those who had paid for it, but the physical separation was less pronounced, the language on screens more respectful. Most noticeable was the new signage prominently displayed at every Global Airways gate: medical needs take priority. Please alert any crew member. As they watched, an elderly passenger using a cane approached the gate agent, a young man named Michael, who wore both the traditional Global Airways wings and the Reynolds Foundation pin on his uniform. "Excuse me," the passenger said hesitantly. "I have diabetes and need to take medication with food shortly after boarding." Without hesitation, Michael smiled warmly. "Of course, sir. Let me arrange pre-boarding for you right now. Would you like me to notify the cabin crew so they can ensure you receive appropriate service immediately after takeoff?" The passenger's relief was visible. "Yes, that would be very helpful. Thank you." "My pleasure," Michael replied, and it seemed he genuinely meant it. Kimberly squeezed Anthony's hand. That would have made all the difference a year ago. They continued observing as boarding proceeded. The process remained stratified by ticket class, a commercial reality neither of them had sought to eliminate, but the tone had shifted significantly. Economy passengers were addressed with the same respectful language as premium travelers. Families with young children were accommodated regardless of fare class. Small courtesies that had once been reserved for elite customers were now extended universally. "Inspector Reynolds, Dr. Reynolds," a voice called from behind them. They turned to find a young woman in a Global Airways uniform approaching Lisa Garcia, her confidence clearly grown over the past year. "I thought that might be you," she said with a smile. "Are you traveling today?" "Just observing," Anthony explained. "It's been exactly 1 year." Lisa nodded, understanding immediately. "Would you like to see more?" "I'm working the flight today, but we have about 20 minutes before I need to board." They accepted her offer, following as she led them through the terminal, pointing out the changes implemented over the past year. Digital screens throughout the concourse displayed the airline's revised service commitment. Training sessions occurred visibly in gate areas rather than hidden away in corporate classrooms. Most significantly, passenger feedback kiosks were positioned at strategic locations, allowing travelers to rate their experience based on dignity metrics rather than just satisfaction scores. The foundation training has been implemented for every customer-facing employee now, Lisa explained. Over 14,000 staff members in total. And the impact, Kimberly asked. Complaints down by 62%. Medical incident response times improved by 81%. Employee satisfaction up 43%. Lisa recited the statistics with evident pride. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. It just feels different, like we're actually doing the job we signed up for. As they approached Gate 42B again, a Global Airways executive was waiting. Jennifer Lawson, VP of Customer Experience, now serving as the company's liaison to the Reynolds Foundation. "I heard you were here," she said, extending her hand. "We should have anticipated you might visit on the anniversary." "We weren't looking for a formal reception," Anthony assured her. "Just wanted to see for ourselves." Jennifer nodded. "The changes you've helped create extend far beyond Global Airways now. 4 other major carriers have adopted similar programs. The Department of Transportation has incorporated elements of our training into their regulatory guidance." She gestured toward a plaque mounted near the gate desk, previously unnoticed by Anthony and Kimberly. It read simply, "The Reynolds Standard. Every passenger, every flight, equal dignity." "These are displayed at every gate now," Jennifer explained. "Not as corporate marketing, but as a daily reminder to our team of the commitment we've made." The moment was interrupted by the approach of a passenger, a young black woman with a toddler in tow looking harried and worried. "Excuse me," she addressed Lisa directly. "My son has severe food allergies, and I'm concerned about snack service on the flight. Is there someone I can speak with?" Without missing a beat, Lisa responded with genuine attentiveness. "Absolutely, ma'am. I'll be working your flight, and we take food allergies very seriously. Let me note this in our system immediately and ensure all crew members are aware." The interaction was brief but powerful in its normality, a passenger expressing a legitimate need, a staff member responding with appropriate concern. No judgment about ticket class or appearance influencing the quality of care. As the mother thanked Lisa and moved toward the seating area, Kimberly whispered to Anthony, "That's why we did this." Their observation visit concluded as boarding for Flight 1207 began in earnest. Lisa needed to assume her duties, and Jennifer had other commitments. As they prepared to leave, a senior flight attendant approached James Rodriguez, now serving as a training coordinator for the Reynolds Foundation program. "I hoped I might see you today," he said warmly. "I wanted you to know that what happened last year, it changed everything. Not just policies and procedures, but how we see ourselves and our passengers." Anthony nodded. That was always the goal. Not just to fix one incident, but to transform the underlying mindset. "Well," James replied with a small smile, mission accomplished. As they walked away from Gate 42B, Anthony and Kimberly reflected on the journey of the past year, from humiliation and medical danger to institutional transformation and industry-wide impact. "We never did get that vacation, you know," Kimberly observed as they reached the terminal exit. "At least not the one we planned." Anthony laughed. "True, but I think we found something more important." Speaking of which, Kimberly said, checking her watch, "We have that foundation board meeting at 3. "Yes, but first," Anthony replied, leading her toward the first-class check-in counter for their favorite airline, not Global Airways, but a competitor that had enthusiastically adopted the Reynolds standards. "We have a plane to catch." "First class?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. "Of course," he confirmed, "but not because we deserve more dignity than anyone else. Just because after a year of changing an industry, we've earned a little extra legroom." As they approached the counter, the agent recognized them immediately, not from the viral videos or news coverage, but from their work with the foundation that was transforming air travel one flight at a time. "Dr. and Mr. Reynolds." She greeted them warmly. "Thank you for everything you've done. Where are you headed today?" Anthony smiled. "Hawaii. We have some unfinished business with a couple of Mai Tais on the beach." 2 years after Flight 1207, the aviation industry had undergone a transformation that few could have predicted from a single denied request for orange juice. What began as an isolated incident involving one flight attendant and one passenger had catalyzed a fundamental re-examination of how airlines balanced commercial stratification with basic human dignity. The statistics told part of the story. Medical incident response times across major carriers had improved by 76% on average. Disability-related complaints had declined by 64%. Passenger satisfaction scores for economy travelers had increased significantly, while premium cabin ratings remained stable or improved, disproving the industry assumption that treating all passengers with dignity would somehow diminish the premium experience. More telling than the numbers were the cultural changes visible throughout the travel experience. The language of air travel had shifted subtly but significantly. Gate announcements that once used phrases like "boarding our premium customers first" had evolved to "welcoming our first-class passengers," a small linguistic shift that acknowledged the humanity of all travelers rather than implying some were customers while others were merely bodies to be transported. Training programs across the industry now incorporated elements pioneered by the Reynolds Foundation, with particular emphasis on medical response protocols and communication standards that maintained respect regardless of ticket class. The Reynolds Foundation itself had expanded beyond its initial focus on global airways, now working with 8 major carriers, 2 airport authorities, and several industry associations to develop and implement dignity-centered practices throughout the travel experience. Anthony had taken a 2-year leave from the FAA to serve as the Foundation's executive director, bringing his regulatory expertise to the development of industry-wide standards. Kimberly split her time between pediatric surgery and leading the Foundation's medical response training initiatives, helping flight crews understand the urgency behind passenger medical requests. The most profound impact, however, was in the individual stories that emerged as the Foundation's work expanded. An elderly passenger with limited mobility who received attentive assistance throughout his journey, regardless of his basic economy ticket. A child with autism whose needs were accommodated with understanding rather than impatience, allowing her family to travel without fear of judgment. A diabetic business traveler who requested juice during a hypoglycemic episode and received immediate respectful assistance without skepticism or delay. These moments of dignity, unremarkable in their normalcy, but revolutionary in their consistency, represented the true legacy of what had begun on Flight 12007. The transformation was never about eliminating service differences between cabin classes, Anthony explained during an industry keynote address. Premium travelers should absolutely receive the enhanced amenities and services they've paid for. The change was in recognizing that dignity isn't an amenity. It's a fundamental right of every passenger regardless of ticket price. This distinction had proven crucial to industry acceptance of the reforms. By focusing specifically on dignity, rather than challenging the entire class-based model of air travel, the Reynolds Foundation had created a framework that airlines could adopt without undermining their revenue strategies. Perhaps most significantly, the Air Carrier Access Amendment Act legislation, inspired by the Flight 1207 incident, had been signed into law, codifying many of the voluntary reforms into federal regulation. The law specifically prohibited medical response discrimination based on cabin class and mandated consistent dignity standards throughout aircraft. In the boardrooms of major airlines, what had initially been viewed as a reputational crisis management exercise had evolved into a business advantage. Carriers that embraced the Reynolds standards found themselves attracting more loyal passengers across all fare classes. It turned out that travelers at every price point valued being treated with basic humanity and were increasingly making booking decisions based on dignity ratings as well as price and schedule. 2 years after being denied orange juice because of her budget ticket, Dr. Kimberly Reynolds had helped transform how millions of passengers experienced air travel. The incident that had nearly caused her a medical emergency had ultimately made flying safer and more dignified for travelers with medical conditions around the world. As Anthony often noted in his speeches to industry executives, the cost of dignity is surprisingly low. The cost of its absence, as Global Airways discovered, is immeasurably high. The sunset painted Waikiki Beach in shades of gold and crimson as Anthony and Kimberly Reynolds walked barefoot along the shore, the warm Pacific water occasionally washing over their feet. 2 years after their ill-fated attempt at a Hawaiian vacation, they had finally claimed their long-delayed escape. They stopped at a quiet spot near the iconic silhouette of Diamond Head, watching as the fiery sphere of the sun met the horizon. Neither spoke immediately. They simply absorbed the moment of peace that had been so long in coming. "Do you ever think about her?" Kimberly asked finally. Vanessa Anthony considered the question. "Sometimes. I heard she's working at a hotel now. Front desk. Do you think she's learned anything?" "I hope so," he replied. "But that was never really the point, was it? This was never about punishing one flight attendant." Kimberly nodded, watching the gentle waves. It was about fixing a broken system. They continued walking, leaving footprints in the wet sand that were quickly erased by the incoming tide. "You know what I realized," Kimberly said after a while. "When we first tried to take this vacation, we were just Anthony and Kimberly, a compliance inspector, and a surgeon trying to escape our demanding jobs for 2 weeks. And now," she smiled, "now we're the Reynolds people whose name is on a foundation, a federal act and service standards adopted by airlines around the world. Anthony chuckled. Not exactly what we planned when we booked those economy seats to Hawaii. No, Kimberly agreed. But maybe it's what we were meant to do all along. They reached a small beach bar nestled among palm trees, twinkling lights creating a warm glow as dusk deepened. Anthony ordered 2 Mai Tais, the drinks they had planned to enjoy 2 years earlier. As they settled into comfortable chairs facing the ocean, a young couple approached their table. The woman, clearly pregnant, hesitated before speaking. "Excuse me," she said. "You're the Reynolds, aren't you? From the flight incident?" Anthony and Kimberly exchanged glances before nodding. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman continued. "I'm diabetic, and I used to be terrified of flying, worried about being taken seriously if I needed help. The changes you created, they've made such a difference for people like me." Her husband added, "We're taking our baby moon now before our daughter arrives. 2 years ago, my wife wouldn't have felt safe flying while pregnant with diabetes." After the couple moved on, Anthony raised his glass. To unintended consequences, to dignity. Kimberly countered, touching her glass to his, and to the power of standing up when it matters. As darkness settled over the beach, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a humiliating denial of orange juice had catalyzed a movement that transformed how millions experienced air travel. The incident on Flight 1207 had revealed not just one flight attendant's bias, but an industry-wide culture that had gradually normalized treating some passengers as less deserving of basic dignity than others. In challenging that culture not through lawsuits or financial settlements, but through structural reform, they had created something lasting, a new standard that recognized dignity as a universal right rather than a premium amenity. "You know what's funny," Anthony said as they watched the stars appear above the Pacific. "We never actually set out to change an industry." "No," Kimberly agreed with a soft smile. "We just wanted some juice." Their laughter mingled with the sound of gentle waves washing ashore, a reminder that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest human needs, and that dignity, once recognized as essential, can never again be viewed as optional. Have you ever been judged based on appearances rather than reality? Have you experienced the sting of assumptions made about you because of how you look or what you can afford? The story of Anthony and Kimberly Reynolds reminds us that power often hides in unexpected places, sometimes beneath a Howard University hoodie or behind a medical alert bracelet. It shows us that when systems fail to recognize our humanity, we have both the right and the responsibility to stand up and demand better. Perhaps you've witnessed discrimination in the skies in a restaurant or in a doctor's office. Perhaps you've been the person treated as less valuable because you couldn't afford the premium option. Or perhaps you've been the one with authority who chose compassion over judgment. Whatever your experience, your story matters. It's part of a larger conversation about how we treat each other when status and hierarchy enter the equation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a time when dignity made all the difference, whether denied or affirmed. Because ultimately, the lesson of Flight 1207 isn't about airlines or regulations or even orange juice. It's about recognizing that dignity isn't a luxury upgrade. It's the baseline for humanity. Like, subscribe, and share this story if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with basic respect, no matter the price of their ticket through life.